people whose lives are still at risk.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you.
We want to go now, Matt, to Jim Miklaszewski, who is at the Pentagon. Jim, a lot of these flights were transcontinental flights, heavily loaded not only with passengers but with fuel.
That's right, Tom, and we just learned a few moments ago that the U.S. Navy is dispatching a couple of aircraft carriers from Norfolk, the JFK and the George Washington. One will be stationed off of New York. The other will be stationed in the Atlantic as close to Washington, D.C. as they can get. They'll be there to provide any possible military support that may be needed, including flying any kind of air cover should there be any additional warnings of any further terrorist attempted attacks. Now, as we stood here this morning, you can see the smoke is still billowing. The smoke just in the past few minutes has changed from black to white, a strong indication that they're throwing more water on the fire, as we saw from other vantage points. But the priority now is to get the fire under control. A casualty count is impossible at this point, Tom. As you've seen from the earlier pictures, the plane opened a huge wide gash in the side of the building. We're being told between the 4th and the 5th corridors. It smashed through the E and D rings, and people who were in that area tell me that debris and parts of the plane actually penetrated deep all the way into the B ring. There are 5 rings, A through E, and it entered in the E ring, so it plowed through a number of the rings. The priority now, as I said, is accounting for the casualties. Medevac helicopters have been flying in and out. You hear the ambulances. Occasionally, we've even seen F-16s flying low routes around the Pentagon and over Washington, D.C., flying those CAPs or air patrol missions that are usually flown in combat. But to see 2 aircraft carriers moved in locations off the United States to provide air cover, Tom, I mean, that's the kind of thing you normally see in a war zone.
Mick, can you tell me, was that chosen randomly where they hit the Pentagon? Can you tell us what the function of those people in that particular ring was, where it was hit?
Well, it's interesting because a number of people, and this really wasn't sarcastic, but they said, well, they hit on the wrong side, because just the opposite side of the building, of course, you have the offices of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. We were on that side of the building when the plane hit. We felt the building shake, the windows rattle, and looking outside immediately saw people on the run. There was pandemonium in the hallways. Now, that section of the Pentagon, I thought at first when it was described to me that it may have hit in an area where some of the special operations offices are located. The Assistant Secretary for Special Operations is located near there, but the plane actually hit maybe about 60 to 70 feet to the right of that location. In that part of the building, there's it's very near a mall area, actually, where they have a shopping area for Pentagon employees. After all, there are 25 to 30,000 employees in there on any given day. And also in that part of the building, you had many Navy personnel, many reserve personnel. I bumped into many Army personnel who are adjacent to that. They think everybody's all right. The Navy people I talked to said they still had a few people that were unaccounted for. But again, it's going to be impossible to tell exactly what the casualty count is in there until they get that fire under control.
Matt.
All right, Jim Miklaszewski outside the Pentagon, thanks very much. Joining us now is General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the commander of all forces in the Persian Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, you've seen the footage, I'm sure, of the Pentagon and of southern Manhattan. We haven't seen much footage outside Pittsburgh. What are your thoughts this morning?
Well, you know, it's a very, very sad day for this country. It's really a sad day for the world as far as I'm concerned, and your heart goes out to all those families, and your prayers go out to all those people who lost their lives. We are fighting a war now, it seems, a terrorist war here in this country. The question is, how do we go about fighting it, General? Well, you know, that's one of those easy questions to ask and one of those very tough questions to answer. The deterrence against terrorists is almost impossible, because these are people who could care less about their own survival. And normally deterrence just says, you know, you hit me and we hit you back harder. And in this case, these people don't care whether they lose their lives or not, and therefore it makes it doubly tough to deter. The fact is that the world is getting smaller, And you know, terrorism has come to our shores because we have the ability to span oceans and great distances in a very short time.
Yeah, General, have you been able to talk to anyone at the Pentagon and get some updates on who may have been injured or lost?
No, I mean, the information that I've heard is basically what you all have, and that's it. You know, they didn't hit the very critical parts, and therefore maybe we don't have as many casualties there. But when you look at what happened at the World Trade Center and the number of casualties that they probably have there, it's just horrendous.
General Schwarzkopf, hi, it's Katie. I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously you've been in the military for a long, long time. Have you ever heard, or is this a method of destruction that the U.S. military was aware of and had concerns about, where they would actually, hijackers would use a plane as a flying bomb?
Well, Katie, you know, Tom Clancy wrote a book about just that. Several years ago, he wrote a book about a Japanese pilot crashing his 747 directly into the Capitol building and wiping out the national government. And so it's not something that's new. Obviously, what's kind of shocking is we thought we had good protection against hijacking of aircraft, and what's very apparent today is that something needs to be done about that if this many aircraft can be hijacked all at the same time.
Meaning security at airports across the country, General?
Well, that and many other measures that could be taken, but I mean, it's kind of frightening when you consider the number of aircraft that were simultaneously hijacked and apparent with, I don't know, I can't say with apparent ease, I don't know, but it did in fact happen, and that's kind of frightening in itself.
Well, also, General Tom Brokaw here, the failure of intelligence here. I know it's always easy to say that at this point, but this is a very sophisticated and obviously widespread, complex operation that was planned. It was very tightly held in the most sophisticated way.
Yeah, Tom, but you and I both know that getting inside the intelligence, getting inside a terrorist group is probably the most difficult type of penetration that you can do. I mean, you've got to have somebody on the inside that can let you know what's going on, and that's not always the easiest thing to do in this type of terrorist organization.
All right, thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. We'll be back in touch with you throughout the day as we get more information. We'd love to get your oversight on all of this if we can.
Okay, Tom.
Well, let's go to Paul Bremer now, Ambassador Paul Bremer, who's the chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism. Mr. Ambassador, do we have any idea whatsoever who may be responsible for this?
Well, as you were just saying, we have a massive intelligence failure and a huge security failure that's going to have to be looked into. Analytically, there probably are 4 possible candidates. There's the Osama bin Laden al-Qaeda group that you've been talking about. There is the possibility of a Middle Eastern group such as Hezbollah or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad conducting an attack like this. And there are at least 2 states which at least are capable of such an attack, and that would be Iran and Iraq. So you have probably not more than 4 suspects.
How do we begin to find out who is responsible?
Well, the good news is that the hijacking 4 airplanes is a very complicated operation. Even hijacking 1 is complicated. And they will have left some trail behind them. They will have had to have checked in. They will have had to have purchased tickets either under their name or alias names. They will have had to have showed pieces of identity. There will be a trail that will lead back from the hijackers at some point to the perpetrators. It may take some time, but we'll get there.
You're an expert on national security matters, Ambassador. How is this country going to have to change?
Well, I think it's one of those great challenges of fighting terrorism is to find the balance between being tempted to overreact, but also being absolutely certain, as the President said this morning, that people understand we're not going to take this sitting down. And I think once the perpetrators have been identified, and I believe they will be, the United States will have to retaliate with the full force of its military as hard as it possibly can. This is an act of war. It's an act of war that some have described as a domestic Pearl Harbor. In many ways, it's worse than Pearl Harbor. I think we will probably find the casualties are going to be higher than they were at Pearl Harbor. In Pearl Harbor, we knew immediately who had done it, and we therefore knew what the return address was. It was Japan. Here, we have higher casualties, less certainty as to where the attack came from, and therefore a more difficult response. But there must be a very strong military response to this act of war.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Paul Bremer, who is a longtime colleague of Henry Kissinger and a veteran of national security affairs in this country. this is routine in times like this. The Taliban ambassador to Pakistan has condemned what he called the terrorist attack, saying this is a terrorist act. We strongly condemn as the Taliban have given shelter to the Saudi militant Osama bin Laden, of course, and he's been accused by the United States in the past of masterminding these kinds of attacks. So they're at least on the record from a rhetorical point of view of saying we had nothing to do with this.
Let's go to Martin Fletcher, NBC's Martin Fletcher, Tom, who is in Israel right now. Martin, tell me the reaction by the Israelis to this, of course, turn of events here in the United States.
Well, of course, everybody has been very, very quick to express complete solidarity with the United States. The Israelis, of course, are very experienced in these kind of things. They've offered to send all their emergency help they can to the United States. They've also, by the way, just closed the Israeli airspace just in case things do spread. But among the Palestinians, there's a different reaction. Yasser Arafat immediately expressed complete horror, condemned the attacks completely, but on the same time, in some places on the streets in the Palestinian towns, there's been rather strong expressions of support, of delight even. There were 3,000 Palestinians took to the streets, we're told, in the West Bank city of Nablus, and smaller demonstrations also in East Jerusalem, Tulkarm, Bethlehem, other Palestinian towns in support of the bombers. Happy of these few Palestinians at what has happened. But of course, that's just, we don't know how widespread that is, but there have been some clear support, demonstrations of support for the bombings.
But Martin, we should point out...
I must stress, the Palestinian leader, I should stress that Palestinian leaders all condemn totally the bombings.
We should put into some perspective for us, if you could, Martin, how displeased many Palestinians are with the United States right now about their feelings that somehow the U.S. is siding more with Israeli and what's going with the Israelis in terms of what's going on in the Middle East.
Well, there's complete support across the board belief among Palestinians that the United States and Israel are one. That the United States is together with Israel in the situation here in Israel and the West Bank. They believe the United States completely supports Israel and therefore deserves to some kind of attacks against the United States. There have been many calls here, especially in recent weeks, by the way, in some of the Palestinian media, for attacks against the United States. So there is a great feeling of anger, a great belief that America supports Israel, and a great belief also that Israel, without American support, could not be as aggressive in its retaliation against Palestinian suicide attacks as it is. So
but Martin, that's really
a feeling, strong feeling.
I was just going to say, Martin, that sentiment.
Sorry, Katie,
I was just going to say that sentiment is really nothing new. Has it been exacerbated in recent weeks in terms of how the Bush administration has been dealing with the Mideast?
I think it has been exacerbated because throughout the last 11 months of the fighting, there was always a feeling among Palestinian leaders that the worse the fighting got, the more likely it would be that the United States administration would intervene, would try to help impose a solution on the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Palestinians have always wanted an international force to get involved, believing that's the only way to really get to a solution, an imposed solution. And what they're seeing from Washington is, if anything, President Bush backtracking from that, making it rather clear in several statements from American leaders that Israel and the Palestinians should get on with it, and that until there's a real possibility of peace talks, America won't get involved. That's the belief of Palestinians. But of course, I just want to stress that this Palestinian anger, we don't know that has anything to do, of course, with what happened today.
All right. Thank you, Martin Fletcher, in Israel this morning, this afternoon.
I was going to say we have a couple of other developments that we ought to share with everyone. Ripple effect seems like an understatement. The U.S. borders with Mexico and Canada now have been closed. White House sources are saying all principals in the White House, senior Bush advisors and officials like the Vice President and the President himself are either in the Situation Room or in bomb shelters. They will not say exactly where the President is, except to say that he is safe. There have been comparisons to Pearl Harbor this morning. 2,400 people were killed in Pearl Harbor on that attack on December 7, 1941. It is likely that the death toll today will be higher. The political magnitude of this is yet to be fully calibrated as well. But as we have been saying throughout the day, this is a new form of warfare against the United States.
And as Ambassador Bremer said, in that case, we had the return address.
Right.
It's still certainly unclear and may remain unclear who was responsible for these absolutely horrendous attacks.
Christian Martin is a producer for Dateline NBC, and he joins us now. Christian, you were obviously down in the area based on your appearance, and I understand you shot some video while you were down there. First of all, tell me how close to the buildings you were.
It was probably about 2 to 3 blocks away, and they were moving most of the folks back. Near me were probably 20 or 30 cops and emergency personnel, and at this point we were thinking, wow, and then suddenly this cloud started moving real fast, as you can see, and it was a dead sprint for about 20 of us. I found the corner, the cloud blew me into a car across the street. I crawled under a car. You could hear, it was pitch black, you could hear chunks of concrete falling all around you.
You were under a car?
I got blown into a car and then crawled under a car.
How difficult was it to breathe at that point?
Very difficult. It was probably pitch black for about 2 minutes. I was covering my mouth. It was, for a while you didn't hear anything, and then you heard a lot of moans and groans. You know, that it was really just a canyon, and the entire force of the blast came shooting down it much faster than you would imagine. As you watched it fall, you thought.
You say you heard moans and groans. Did you see many of the injured around you as when the dust finally settled somewhat, so that you could get out from under the car?
I was really kind of in shock and stumbled around for a little bit. You could see that there were some people there. Everybody that was in the area was pretty affected. There was no emergency personnel helping anybody. Everybody that was there was in pretty bad shape at the moment. And as I started to wander farther and farther away from it, you could see more people coming. The cops and the firemen down there were just incredible, and you know, probably still are down there. So.
Obviously, it was a very frightening situation for you to be in. Did you have any idea? I mean, were they anticipating that because of the size of the hole in this building, that the whole building might come crashing down?
That wasn't my sense. I mean, it was obviously a terrible tragedy, but I felt that I was down in Oklahoma City about 3 hours after that blast happened, and I felt that things were beginning to ramp down. The emergency, obviously there was a lot of tragedy going on, but I felt like the cops and the firemen were sort of beginning to get the situation under control. They were moving everybody back. By and large, the streets were cleared. There was a lot of emergency tape, and then when that started, we were all surprised. You could hear the voices saying, "Move back." I mean, there were a lot of people on the street.
Did you see the triage units at work and people being helped in the immediate vicinity? Because one of our first concerns when this happened was, what about the people who were outside the building who were in serious pain?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what was going on right in the immediate area. I assume there were, I hope there was no one around. As I said, I sort of stumbled away from it, and by the time I got 3 or 4 blocks away and the air cleared enough so that you could see, we were then all being pushed away. But I mean, you could still see the remains of the plane crash from earlier that day. I mean, I shot some video of a huge airplane wheel. There were body parts, you know, all over West Street. I mean, it was insane down there.
Well, Christian, thanks so much for coming by. We're glad you're safe, of course, as well. Meanwhile, we're going to go back to Washington, where Bob Hager is standing by with more information. Bob.
Katie, the word now on these air crashes is there's 266 dead total. That's the rough addition at the moment in the hijacking of 4 planes. 2 of them were United airliners and 2 American airliners. 2 out of the 4, by the way, I'm getting my own voice coming back to me in my ear if somebody can help me on that. 2 of them were American, 2 United airliners. 2 of the 4 took off from Boston, 1 from Newark, 1 from Washington, Dulles. 2 of those planes went into the World Trade Center, 1 went into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed in rural Pennsylvania. There are 50 flights that are still in the air at this point. That is 50 commercial flights. The FAA has put what they call a ground hold on all flights in the U.S. So 50 of those flights are still in the air. That means that virtually everybody's landed at this point, and if there's any good news in any of this, they say that at the moment none of those planes appear to be hijacked or in trouble. And they're all very close to landing now, within 40 or 50 miles of an airport, their airport where they intend to land. So that should put them on the ground in the next half hour or so.
Bob, I just want to ask you, Bob, have many of those planes been diverted? In other words, are they reaching their destinations, or are they having emergency or premature landings elsewhere?
Yeah, there is nothing on that. They left it to the discretion of the pilots. They said if you want to go on to your landing, unless unless you're going to land in New York or Washington, go ahead to your landing if you want to, or you can divert if you choose to do that. So New York and Washington were the only two that were closed to incoming flights. I'm now told that there are 22 international flights still in the air. So we have 50 domestic commercial flights still in the air, 22 international flights still in the air. None of those believed to be in trouble, so that it's been more than 2 hours now since the last of these crashes, and hopefully if that word is correct from the FAA, then we've seen the last of this.
Bob,
Again,
I was just going to mention,
surely.
you know, Peter Greenberg, our travel editor, had an interesting observation that perhaps the airlines that or planes that were chosen were because they had the most fuel. They were planning to travel across country most of those flights. Can you weigh in on that?
It is curious that 3 out of these 4 flights were bound for Los Angeles. They were 757s and 767s.
And the other to San Francisco.
Yeah, but none of them had to fly long distances because the 2 crashes in New York, let's see, those planes came from Boston, and from the second tower crash was, both of those flights were from Boston, the 2 crashes into the World Trade Center towers, and then the crash here in Washington into the Pentagon was a takeoff from Washington Dulles, so that's very close by, and the crash that happened in rural Pennsylvania was a takeoff from Newark Airport, so that was not a terribly long distance.
Seb, I think what Katie's getting to, Bob, is that the planes were loaded with a lot of fuel because they were anticipating a long flight, and perhaps they were chosen because of the damage that fuel would do on impact.
Well, that could be a factor, yes, because you would imagine that a plane with a whole lot of fuel would make a lot bigger explosion than one that was had only a limited amount of fuel left.
All right, Bob Hager in Washington. Bob, thank you very much. So now we know from Bob that there are 266 people dead as a result of those 4 planes. Obviously, this is an unspeakable tragedy for so many families throughout the country, not to mention all the lives lost here in New York City and at the Pentagon. But again, American Airlines Flight 11, American Airlines Flight 77, United Airlines Flight 175, and United Airlines Flight 93. Both American Airlines flights, I understand, were en route from Boston to Los Angeles. The United Airlines flight, one from Newark to San Francisco, and the second from Washington, D.C., actually from Dulles International Airport in Virginia to Los Angeles as well. If you need any information about a loved one on board, these are the following numbers you should call: 1-800-245-0999 or 1-800-932-8555. Those numbers, the first one for American Airlines, the second one for United.
And of course, what we don't know about those flights is what happened in the cockpit. That had to be the worst kind of terror, because they were able to force the plane, 2 of the planes into the World Trade Center and then 1 into the Pentagon. Did they take over controls? Did they shoot the pilot and the co-pilot? Did they have a gun at their head and force them to do this? We don't know, and we don't know whether there's any radio traffic to describe what may have been going on at that time. There's just been one report that they knew there was a hijacking, and they were citing radio traffic at that time. So this only adds to the horror that I think everyone is beginning to feel across this country today.
Clearly.
About what they try to imagine what has been going on. And it is just beginning, I suspect, for a lot of people to fully sink in about what we're going through. And we are just halfway through this day. And it's going to be a long day and a long week and many months to come as we continue to deal with this. So there's going to be a test of this country, and we're going to have to steel ourselves for some very difficult decisions
Clearly,
ahead.
this was a suicide mission of enormous magnitude, and of course we heard speculation from Pat Dawson at the scene that there might have even been a secondary bomb on board the aircraft, although who knows what kind of explosion would occur if a plane actually crashes in a building that's 110 stories high.
Is it too much to ask? Do we still have that identified? We're not going to do this in a gratuitous way, but to give you an idea of what happened, we have an astonishing piece of videotape of the second plane going into the World Trade Center, and you can see it coming from right to left across the screen. We'll try to play that for you in slow motion. There it is, first real time. And now let's just back it up for a moment, and we'll play it in slow-mo. so that you can see that, in fact, it was an airliner.
And when you saw the impact from a different angle, you saw the plane hit one side of the building, and then you saw parts of the other side of the building blowing out. So you can only imagine how far that plane traveled through the building on impact. And keeping in mind that we want to talk about the location here. Southern tip of Manhattan, Newark Airport, probably what, Tom, as the crow flies, 10 miles?
Yeah, maybe.
To the west and south. Kennedy Airport, another 10 miles maybe to the east. LaGuardia Airport, just to the east as well and slightly north. So air traffic, obviously, it's a congested area, although that was restricted airspace. No planes fly that close to New York City.
Landing gear at the bottom is somewhere in lower Manhattan. It was December 7th, 1941, actually the next day, that FDR said this is a day that shall live in infamy. We are living through another day of infamy for this country.
That was some videotape that was taken by our producer, our Dateline producer, Christian Martin, who was at the scene, Tom, right before that tower collapsed. I'm not sure if he was there before the first tower collapsed or the second tower. I believe it was the first tower. And as we saw, as you mentioned, airline debris, and apparently Christian saw some very grisly things on the scene.
Well, it turns out that President Bush has been diverted to Barksdale Air Force Base, which we believe is in Louisiana, and we expect to hear from him shortly. He has been taken to a secure area. There were reports that he would be taken back to Washington, to Andrews Air Force Base. We've been talking about the secure facilities that are available there to him in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. Actually, the briefing room in the White House itself is secure, but they've decided to divert him, obviously, to an Air Force base, and he will be addressing the nation shortly. You have in your nation's capital now F-16s flying CAPs, they're called. These are air cover missions over the nation's capital after the plane went into the Pentagon today. So we have never been witness to anything quite like this in the United States within the continental borders of this country. An active war, nothing less than that. There is your nation's capital. It is effectively evacuated from the Capitol building itself down majestic Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. A crisis of grave proportions on this land, and the President of the United States in his first year in office will be addressing the nation, we're told, before too long.
And we would have to assume this would have been true, but a Navy public affairs spokesman now tells WUSA-TV that there are indeed dead inside the Pentagon. We want to go back to lower Manhattan. NBC's Pat Dawson is standing by there with more. Pat?
Matt, hundreds of people, we assume, hundreds of people based on the information that we've gotten from emergency officials here are still in there. Obviously, we don't know their condition. We have not seen anybody coming out in some time. The question really for rescue officials at this point is when they can begin to move large numbers of emergency service units, either firefighters, police, or of any kind, into that area down there. This area you're looking at here, we are probably about 12 blocks north of where the World Trade Center once stood. This area here has been secured off basically for emergency workers and also for the press. If you just beyond those police barricades, about 50 yards beyond me, is as far as we are allowed to go. And then beyond that, as you can see, literally hundreds of firefighters and other emergency workers who are massed down there. They have bulldozers, they have all sorts of ambulances and the like. But we have not seen more than a handful of ambulances coming out of there in the last hour or so. That may be only that they are not using this particular way out. That is, of course, possible. They may be routing them from other directions. We can't say that. But at least from this direction, we have seen only a handful of ambulances coming out of there. And clearly, there have to be a great many people in there who are either injured or dead at this point. We spoke to a Port Authority police officer, a lieutenant who was in the building at the time just a few minutes ago. The Port Authority, we remind you once again, is the agency that runs those two twin towers, as well as the World Trade Center complex and the airports and the tunnels and bridges around New York City. He said that he had been in the building at the time, that he heard the explosions. He said it was a frightening situation. And at one point after the initial crash of those two airliners into the sides of the buildings, when there were fires blazing, he said that he saw at least a couple of people leaping from high floors, obviously because of the fires presumably behind them. anyone leaping from a height of that, he said probably at least the 30th floor, obviously leaping to their death. There will be a number of horrible stories. We have already heard many of them so far, but at this point we have basically what we have is hundreds of emergency rescue people who are massed here, and we are waiting to hear when they will be able to go in significant numbers. That's the key thing. A handful may go in here and there, but obviously there are most likely large numbers of people who need help, and we are waiting to hear when large numbers of rescue workers will be able to go in. Back to the studio.
All right, Pat Dawson here in Manhattan. Pat, thank you very much. A bulletin has just crossed that says President Bush says U.S. military on high alert at home and abroad. Again, we believe he is being diverted to Louisiana, and we are waiting to hear word from him. He will reportedly address the nation sometime in the next few hours.
I'm going to go back to Lower Manhattan. Ann Thompson is standing by with more on the story. Ann?
Hi, Matt. Hi, Katie. I was down trying to get to the World Trade Center about 10 o'clock this morning, and I was walking on Broadway at Fullerton, and suddenly we heard an explosion. It was the first tower coming down, and down Broadway you could just see this wall of debris come flying at us, and I was by myself. I took cover in between a column and the building at 195 Broadway. And we stood there I crouched there probably for about a good 5 minutes. It took that long for all the debris to come by, for the air to clear. When I got up, I was covered head to toe with debris. They opened the building. The gates in that building had been locked. They opened the doors. We went inside. They had evacuated this building, which was some 28 floors of commercial space, right after the first plane went into the World Trade Center. We stood in there. You could see outside. It looked like a war zone. Debris, dust, ankle deep, cars on fire, cars turned askew in the explosion. We decided to stay inside. I was there with some firemen and some maintenance workers of this building. We decided to stay in there because it appeared to be safer inside. Then at about 10:30, it looked like everything was all clear. I started to walk out. I walked down Broadway towards Canal, and we heard a second explosion. I ran back into the building. All the chandeliers shook. Again, we were covered with black debris from everywhere. At that point, a fireman came into the building and said we all had to stay in one place. He then told us all to get out of the building because they felt if there was a third explosion that this building would be in danger. And then I walked down Broadway to Canal Street, and it was like walking through something that looked like out of a movie set of a nuclear holocaust. It was nothing but debris and papers and all parts of buildings down and glass.
Can we please move?
I will,
please.
sir. I will.
Right now, please.
Tell the people, please move back. All
right, obviously, Ann Thompson. Ann, thank you very much for that report. Ann's being asked to move her location. Obviously, firefighters and police officers are frantically trying to help those people who have been hurt, who perhaps have not been rescued, or perhaps to retrieve even bodies as a result of this.
So many people in this country obviously in a state of shock over what's happened in several locations, but at times like this you do find people who try to rally to do what they can at St. Vincent's Hospital, which is just south of the World Trade Center, where they've taken a lot of the wounded, 184 patients in total, 10 critical. There are lines now of people who are showing up to donate blood, which is something
heartening in the face of this tragedy. Catherine Hughes is at Virginia Hospital Center, where many of the people who were hurt at the Pentagon, where yet another plane crashed early this morning, is here to tell us what the situation is. Is this the old Arlington Hospital, Catherine?
Yes, it is, Katie.
Can you tell us about the people you're seeing there?
We now have approximately 26 patients. We are expecting more. They're coming in at the moment. We have called in additional surgeons, nurses, and other staff members to help with this crisis. And we've seen basically a variety of medical issues coming in. We do have some in surgery at this time.
So tell me about the medical issues that these individuals are experiencing, Catherine, if you could.
As I said, there are a variety of medical issues, some severe and some not. We do have some cuts, burns, people coming in with shortness of breath. We took our first person at about 10:35 this morning, and they are coming from the Pentagon area.
Catherine, if you could give us an idea, is this the only area hospital that is treating people who are inside the Pentagon at the time of the crash, or have they been diverted to other hospitals as well?
I don't know that. I know that we have already seen 26, and we currently are receiving patients at this time.
A Navy Public Affairs spokesperson has confirmed, or apparently told a local station in Washington, that people have lost their lives inside the Pentagon. And you expect how many more patients, Catherine?
We're expecting patients. We don't know how many. We are just taking them at this time.
All right. Catherine Hughes at Virginia Hospital Center, formerly known as Arlington Hospital. Catherine, thanks so much for talking with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Just to recap where the president was when this occurred, just before 9 o'clock this morning, he was taking part in an education event near Longboat Key, Florida. He was actually, we understand, reading to students down there when he first got word of the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center, and then he was given word that a second plane had crashed into the other tower. He did have a chance to make some comments before heading out of Florida, and here's a sample of what he had to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary Rod Pace and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence.
I want to mention that President Bush is said to have made a couple of other comments. He said that freedom itself was attacked, freedom will be protected, and that the U.S. will hunt down and punish those responsible. Go ahead.
He also said that the U.S. military was on high alert at home and abroad.
Just to update you on the situation, we told you that there had been several international flights en route to the United States. The original plan from the FAA was to divert those to Canada. We now understand that they will be allowed to land in the U.S. The FAA is not saying why they're not going forward with their original plans to divert to Canada, and we don't have any information on the points of origin or the destinations of those 22 planes. NBC's Campbell Brown is standing by in Washington. Campbell?
Well, Matt, what we can tell you is that we do know the president now is at the Barksdale Air Force Base. That's in Shreveport, Louisiana, northern Louisiana. He flew there from Florida, where he was this morning. And it was interesting because in those early minutes, shortly after Air Force One took off from Florida, no one was told within the White House press corps where the president was, where he was going. Our information now is coming from what we call the travel pool. It is one network reporter who is on board the plane with the president. He did make a brief statement. We're waiting to get more on what he said when they landed at Barksdale Air Force Base. We're not sure whether or not he's going to stay there or that they will take the president somewhere else. There are a number of options, obviously. There's a bunker in Colorado Springs that the military runs. There is the so-called Doomsday plane, which is another option. This is an aircraft that is far more sophisticated than Air Force One. It has the most advanced electronic equipment on board where the president could communicate with anyone from that plane. It can stay in the air. It can be refueled in the air. So it is something that was designed and built in the event that there was a nuclear attack, but it is a possible option today if they feel like they need that. Of course, the president, when he was in Florida and initially made those remarks you played a moment ago, he did say he was coming back from Washington, but obviously now they're reevaluating the situation to try to figure out where it may be best for him to operate from. There are a few officials still at the White House now. His National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and other key officials are in the White House. We're told they're operating out of the Situation Room, and that a few areas of the White House have been designated as so-called hard rooms, meaning Special Secret Service agents are there guarding the few key people who are needed to stay at the White House. The rest of the White House has been evacuated. but the president is obviously in close contact with his national security team, who is remaining there for the time being. He was informed of this while he was in Florida at an education event this morning of the first incident when the first plane flew into the World Trade Center. He was told by phone by his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice, while he was in a holding room, while he was about to go out and speak to some elementary school children. Then while he was actually reading to these students, a note was passed him from his chief of staff, Andy Card. In the pictures, you can see the reaction on the president's face, as shocked as the rest of us at what had happened. And his plans immediately changed, initially to come back to Washington, but now, again, the Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, and we'll be waiting further word on where he will go from here and where he will sort of command the military operations, given the situation. Matt?
All right, Campbell, thank you very much. Katie?
Meanwhile, Matt, Cardinal Egan of the New York Archdiocese is joining us now. He has been outside St. Vincent's Hospital here in Manhattan delivering last rites to some of the people who have been brought to that hospital. Your Eminence, thank you for talking with us. Can you tell us or describe the scene for us, if you could?
Well, I've been here since the very beginning. We have 184 patients here at St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. 10 are critical, and 6 are of the police department or the fire department. So far, 2 have passed away. The situation has been that the doctors and the nurses are waiting outside here. The hospital is completely mobilized, and we believe that we will be able to handle whomever they send. We understand that Bellevue Hospital and St. Vincent's Hospital are the 2 places where they'll be sending the most critically injured, and that they do have triage down closer to the 2 centers. I have to say this, that I've taken care of a lot of people spiritually, anointed a lot of people, and I've no limit to my admiration for what I've seen of the doctors, the nurses, and the staff and the administration of St. Vincent's Hospital. And I'm told that that is what is to be found throughout this great city of New York. We're addressing this the way New Yorkers address things, with a prayer and with a total commitment to help everyone who is hurting, and especially to make it clear to families and others that we will be doing the very best we can for their loved ones. Well, I have here Dr. Ackerman, if you'd like to speak to him.
Sure, that would be great.
Here he is right now.
Dr. Ackerman, are you an emergency physician there? Dr. Ackerman, it's Katie Couric. Thank you for talking with us.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the situation there and how the patients are doing? I know that you have about 184 patients. Is that correct?
That's correct, Katie. And actually, the number is growing as the minutes go on. When the first ambulances came in, there were 10 or 11 people in each of them. Now that the triage centers are set up downtown, we're getting fewer patients at the moment, but we're getting the most critically injured. Severe burns, several heart attacks, multiple traumas, many broken bones. And probably what's most striking is that everyone that's coming is coming full of gray powder from the massive explosions that obviously took place. There are family centers set up here at the medical center. There's a special number that family members can call to try to find out if their loved one is here at St. Vincent's. That's area code 212-604-7285. And the New York City Police Department's working very closely with us. We're very grateful that His Eminence has been here to help us and our staff, and we continue to be prepared. I was here for the last major incident with the World Trade Center, and this, in my opinion, is many, many times worse.
Well, Dr. Ackerman, do you have enough people on staff to take care of the hundreds of people who are there already and the other people who may be arriving at your hospital?
We are very well staffed right now, Katie. We are a little bit concerned, though, about later in the day. People will obviously wear down the number of traumas that you can handle, that one can handle not only physically but psychologically, and so we're asking all of the people that call us at this point in time to please check with us around 5 or 6 o'clock this evening, because we fear we're going to need another shift of workers to handle the tragedy of this magnitude.
All right, and we heard that people were standing in line to donate blood, and of course that was heartening news for us to hear under the circumstances. Dr. Ackerman, thank you very much. I know you're very, very busy, so we'll let you get back to work.
Thank you.
You know, Katie, we've been showing basically video of New York and the World Trade Centers, or where the World Trade Centers used to be, and of Washington and the Pentagon, and we've forgotten somewhat to remind people that there was the crash of another plane, a fourth plane outside Pittsburgh, about 80 miles from Pittsburgh, and we don't have video of that story at the moment. That's one of the reasons we haven't been talking about it as much, but that's the fourth prong in this terrorist attack on U.S. soil, and it's just information we'll be trying to get as the day progresses.
In fact, we want to just repeat those airline numbers, which is you know, extremely upsetting news for people who had loved ones on these flights, but we want to give you that information. The 4 aircraft involved: American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles, United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles. Then there was American Airlines Flight number 77 from Dulles, Washington Dulles to Los Angeles. And finally, United Flight 93, the plane you just referred to that crashed outside of Pittsburgh, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. It was from Newark en route to San Francisco.
Here are the phone numbers if you'd like to inquire. If you think you had a family member or a loved one on board any of those planes, American Airlines has set up a number at 1-800-245-0999, and United Airlines 1-800-932-8555.
You mentioned that we have not shown shots of Pittsburgh and the United Airlines plane that crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. We have the first shots, pretty shaky video of that airplane that crashed shortly after the 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Tower. At least we got the information. And after that other plane crashed into the Pentagon.
In short, and you really can't put this story into short form, this has been perhaps the most devastating day in American history in terms of terrorism. It certainly has been. 4 separate attacks, obviously coordinated fairly thoroughly. 2 on the World Trade Center here in New York, 1 on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. A 4th, the hijacking and crash of a plane, as you just saw, outside Pittsburgh. Unclear now as to how many lives have been lost, but the numbers are bound to be staggering as the day progresses.
Aboard those airplanes alone, 266 people have lost their lives. That was confirmed by both United and American Airlines, and we are unclear, as Matt just said, about the perhaps thousands of people who have been killed and certainly injured as a result of what happened in New York City and outside Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon. With more, here's Tom.
This is an NBC News special report. Here is Tom Brokaw.
September 11th, the year 2001, a day unlike any other in the long course of American history, a terrorist act of war against this country. President Bush saying today that freedom has been attacked by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. Not since Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, 1941, has this country undergone such a devastating and damaging attack. And it may not yet be over. We do know at this time that at least 4 targets have been attacked. The 2 Twin Trade Tower centers here in New York City, the Pentagon, and then another plane that was crashed deliberately into an area outside of Pittsburgh. That is the 2nd plane hitting the Twin Trade Towers this morning, all of them hijacked airliners. Then these 2 colossal icons of the American capitalist system collapsed in lower Manhattan. The death toll at this hour is unknown, but it is expected to be, as Mayor Giuliani has said, horrendous. Shortly after those attacks on the Twin Trade Towers in New York City, at the Pentagon, in one of the outer rings, another hijacked airliner crashed into 2 areas there, killing an untold number of U.S. military personnel in Washington, D.C. A code red was put in effect in the nation's capital. The White House, State Department, CIA evacuated along with the Pentagon. House Speaker Dennis Hastert was evacuated to a secure area. President Bush, who was in Florida for an appearance for an education project, was evacuated to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where we do expect to hear from him before too long. The United States is in effect in a national state of emergency. All domestic flights were grounded immediately. Most flights that were already in the air, we believe, will arrive safely at their destinations. The borders between the United States and Canada and the United States and Mexico have been closed. Transatlantic flights were diverted to Canada. U.S. military forces in this country and around the world have been put on the highest possible alert. Aircraft carriers were moved to waters off New York City as this scene played out in the nerve center of this country, Lower Manhattan, the financial markets, an area that is home to literally hundreds of thousands of people. They are still dealing with the carnage in Lower Manhattan. We want to go now to NBC's David Bloom, who is in Midtown Manhattan, overlooking all of this. As you can see there, communications have been severely interrupted. David?
Well, Tom, what we're looking at behind us more than 4 hours after the first explosion is the smoking hulk of the essentially vanished World Trade Center. As you've said, the essential question at this hour in New York City is how many people may have died in these attacks. The various officials here in New York City believe that the casualty estimates will essentially go into the thousands and thousands of people. Here is the sequence of events as they happened at this hour. The first plane attacks the World Trade Center's South Tower at approximately 8:42 Eastern Time. Airline officials say at least 2 American Airlines flights and 2 United Airlines flights were hijacked today, and that the attack planes were the hijacked domestic flights. Roughly 21 minutes later, approximately 9:03 Eastern Time, the second large jetliner can be seen taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's North Tower. Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling and in some cases jumping from the 2 buildings. At approximately 9:40 a.m. in Washington, D.C., a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, one side of the building collapsing. Non-essential personnel from federal buildings, including the White House and the U.S. Capitol, are evacuated. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside. 1/2 hour later, at approximately 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In a separate but apparently related crash, a fourth hijacked plane, a Boeing 767, crashes in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The FAA closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace. So again, Tom, 4 hijacked airplanes. We know what happened to each of the 4. Other officials investigating now, both apparently the worst terrorist attack in the mainland United States ever. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom. What we don't know is who may be responsible for these attacks. There's a lot of speculation, obviously, about Osama bin Laden, who is the Saudi dissident who is believed to be harbored somewhere in Afghanistan, but no one is claiming responsibility. In the West Bank, however, the Palestinians in the streets are cheering and celebrating these attacks on the United States, even though Palestinian leaders have condemned the attacks. We want to go now to NBC's Pat Dawson, who is down near the World Trade Center, because the big question, obviously, in New York City and across this country, how many people have been able to survive this horrendous attack? Pat?
Tom, right now, hundreds of rescue workers are massed here on the southern tip of New York in Manhattan Island, waiting for a possibility where they can go back in large numbers to begin searching through the debris. Obviously, the first task at hand will be to find anyone who is still alive in there. There really is no precedent for this. 2 110-story buildings. First of all, the impact of those 2 planes into them, and then the buildings themselves literally tumbling down into the streets. It's the sort of thing that one assumes very few people could have survived, but the task of those rescue workers, and if you look behind me, you can see many of them massed down there. The task will be for them to go back in and to try to find anyone who is alive. First of all, that is, of course, the priority. They know. We have spoken to a number of them. Of course, common sense tells us as well they are going to find a very, very high number of dead bodies in there as well. No way. We have spoken to officials here with the police department and with fire. They all say the same thing. This kind of a catastrophe, there's no way of knowing how many people that they're going to find in there. how many people are dead, how many people are alive. There's really no way to know how difficult their task is going to be going in there and trying to dig through the remains of two 110-story buildings that are now lying at the bottom of Manhattan. Obviously, taking care of those that are hurt, that they have been able to get out, is a first priority.
With Kelly Mack, I'm David Cruz. We're in the studio here at NBC in Los Angeles. As we continue our coverage from New York, you're about to hear Los Angeles Police Chief Parks address questions that are being raised here in the Los Angeles area. Also with him are other fire and emergency officials. Let's listen in.
Okay, yes.
Pat Canfield representing the City Controller. Laura Chick representing the City Controller.
Okay. You can't get a double here now. Come on. Okay, ready?
Mike Carey, the City Clerk.
City Clerk. Anyone else, gentlemen? Where am I missing someone? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Representing the City Librarian.
Okay. Good. She's just in. And we also have our President of the Police Commission, Rick Caruso, and then also we have Mr. Stapleton from the FBI, President. Any other? Yes.
Don Kincaid from ATF.
Yes. Okay. Now, would the members of the City Council here? Would you also? And then we have Tim McCosker.
Tim McCosker, Chief of Staff to Maryland.
Okay. We have other City Council members that did not get introduced.
Jan Perry, Council District 9.
Janice Hahn, City Council District 15.
Nick Pacheco, Council District 14. Jack Weiss, District 5.
Cindy Miskowski, District 11.
Eric Garcetti, District 13.
Okay.
Ted Reyes, District 1.
All right. Did we miss any? Not really. Oh, we got, okay, we got all the introductions. Okay, let's start off with Ms. Markery. Why don't you give us a review of what has happened in General Services?
Yes, sir. Department of General Services is responsible for security in and around the Civic Center. When I came in this morning, I directed them to secure the buildings, meaning that only people with badges, city badges, be allowed in or on official business, because at that time, we had not secured the buildings to official business. I secured all commercial parking lots, directed them to empty those lots, and to put on a higher level of security, meaning visual security, going around the building, see if there was anything suspicious in nature at all, period. Anything suspicious. Fleet Services, I directed our heliport to maintain 24-hour operations on the mechanical end. I know that your helicopter's up and running. We will be there all the time, as well as other fleet services. Low level of security, this may sound insignificant, but I do have custodial, I do have parking services, I do have building maintenance people in and around the 425 square miles of the city. I also directed them to be aware of any suspicious packages, any suspicious vehicles, any people that should or should not be in there, or anything out of the ordinary to call me personally and be relayed to the EOB. There was some initial confusion with my security forces. We have rectified that. All communications will be face-to-face out of the EOB, and as I said, we are just concerned now with security and being ready to support the operations of the city.
Thank you, Ray. Any questions from the board to Mr. Muckery?
We have instituted the emergency procedures. All of our downtown office has been secure, although we are still open for business. Our outlying facilities are secure. We've had no incidents. Everything is business as usual right now. Control center is secure. We've got a mobile force put in place to monitor outlying facilities. Right now, everything else is business as usual.
Okay. Frankie?
Department of Transportation. We spent the morning going through our staff and redeploying some of our critical staff to functions to support redeploying some of our critical staff to support functions at the police and fire department. We have assigned staff to command centers. In addition to the Emergency Operations Center here, we have a number of other centers. We have the ATSAC Center, which is fully staffed. That's the traffic management center for the city. We have 2 mobile command centers, and they have been placed, one in the valley and one in the vicinity of the zoo, in the parking lot there. We have 2 other command centers set up, one in the southern district of the city, one in the western district of the city. And so we're fully staffed at all of these various sites. Our communications are all in order and ready, and
is being tested. that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President George W. Bush, in his capacity today, not only as President of the United States, but also as Commander-in-Chief, as U.S. military forces around the world are on the highest possible alert. There is so much uncertainty in this situation. Who is responsible? When it could happen again? And where? These are questions that are still unresolved as we try to work our way through this day. I'm joined on the telephone now by the former National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration, Sandy Berger, a longtime veteran of national security matters in this country. Mr. Berger, in all of your contingency planning during your days in the White House, did you ever anticipate anything like this, 4 hijacked airliners that would be driven into the Twin Trade Towers and the Pentagon?
Well, Tom, I think for some time we have known that terrorism is the greatest security threat that this country faced. We've seen some horrible incidents here before. We broke up a multi-pronged effort on Millennium Weekend, but this certainly goes beyond anything that we have seen before in its dimensions and sophistication.
As we work our way through this day of shock and grief and still trying to count the number of casualties, we also have to say, however, that there has been a stunning failure of intelligence at the highest possible level. The American people are going to wonder why they spent billions of dollars of intelligence if we can't find out about a complex operation like this that involves so many people.
Well, I think all of that is going to have to be sifted out. I think that in the midst of our outrage and anger, President Bush is right. We have to show the world that we will respond to this both with determination and with steadiness. That means first, obviously, focusing on security and on rescue, then on determining who's responsible, and this is of such magnitude that it's inconceivable to me that we will not soon know what the origin of this is, and then how we did not detect this, since it obviously involved a multiple operation based on from the United States. But blame, I think. The blame game, I think, comes, in my judgment, after we do everything we can to take care of the people who are in those buildings. We assure the security of others who may be in situations that are vulnerable, and we find out who is responsible for this absolutely horrifying set of events.
Mr. Berger, it's just not a matter of assigning blame. That's not the question. The question is, how do we get our intelligence back on track so it doesn't happen again in the next 20 minutes or the next 20 hours?
Well, I think we have to recognize that this is the overwhelming security threat to the nation, more so than any foreign nation, more so than long-range missiles. Terrorism has been and continues to be the #1 threat to our people. I think the intelligence community has intensified its efforts over the years, but this simply demonstrates that we're certainly not doing enough.
Sandy Berger, thank you very much for being with us today on what is obviously a day of great trial for this country, a great tragedy, and we have to determine how we go from here once we do begin to sort out just how many lives were lost, who is responsible for all of this, and how we can protect ourselves from this kind of attack again in the future as it continues to play out across America. Robert Knowles is on the phone with us now. He was on the 54th floor, I'm told, of one of the World Trade Center buildings when one of the planes was flown into it. Mr. Knowles, you're safely at home? When one of the planes was flown into it, Mr. Knowles, you're safely at home?
Yes, sir.
Could you turn down your television? I can hear it in the background, and that will cause us some problems if we continue our discussion. Okay. Tell me exactly where you were and what happened to you.
I was on the 54th floor.
Of #1 building or #2?
#1 building.
And when were you first aware of the attack?
Well, something hit the building, and it knocked me to the floor. And then the whole window blew out of the office I was in. And it snatched the desk out of the office like it was a piece of paper.
And how did you get out of that office?
By the grace of God, I was holding on to the door so I wouldn't be sucked out the window.
And then did you go down the stairs?
Yeah, going down the stairs was really rough because it was from the 30th floor down, it was water. The sprinklers was on. And then I pray to God for the people in the wheelchairs because they couldn't get out. They were sitting there waiting for somebody to carry them down.
How many people did you see like that, Mr. Knowles?
2 people. They were invalids. You know, they couldn't get out the wheelchairs. It wasn't a regular wheelchair. It was the kind of wheelchair where they do everything in a wheelchair.
It was a heavy mechanical wheelchair of some kind.
Yes, sir.
And then as you made your way to the bottom of that stairwell, was crowded with other people trying to get out?
Yes, sir, but God bless the fact that it happened early. Because if it had happened at 10:30, it would have been chaos because you couldn't get down the stairs. Between the smoke and the lights being out in the water, and the staircase was slippery.
When you finally got to the ground floor, then what happened?
Then they herded us out of the building. They told us to walk fast. We walked up towards Broadway, up Nassau, and it was glass blown from everywhere.
When you were in your office when the first explosion occurred, that was the first building that was hit?
Yes, sir.
And were there lots of people in the building at that hour?
It was a good amount of people, but not lots.
It was not full to capacity?
No, thank God.
And were there other people who, so far as you could tell, were either seriously hurt or killed in the first explosion that you could find?
No, everybody I seen was mobile. They were able to get out the building. You know, people were coughing, people fell on the stairs. They weren't hurt from the explosion. They were hurt trying to get out of the building.
Okay, Mr. Knowles, we wish you the very best, and by the grace of God, you were able to get out of there, and we know that this has been a difficult time for you, but we thank you for sharing your experience with us today.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Washington now. Senator John McCain, who has declared this an act of war on the United States. It's already being described as a kind of 21st century Pearl Harbor. Senator McCain.
I think that's accurate in many respects, Tom, although clearly the implications of this are very significant, and including the fact that at least we knew exactly who it was that took these actions against the United States at Pearl Harbor. And obviously at this point we don't know who it was or which organization or nation may have been sponsoring this kind of activity.
We're obviously in the early stages dealing still with the shock and the grief, trying to count the number of casualties, but this country will have to take immediate action in terms of how we rearrange ourselves now to hope that we don't have this happen again. We're going to have some profound changes in America, Senator.
I'm afraid so. I think that our lifestyles will not be the same for a very long period of time because of security requirements. I also think that, as I was watching you earlier, there is going to have to be an evaluation about our intelligence capability, and part of that evaluation will be recognition that we don't have the kind of human intelligence capabilities that perhaps we need. We have excellent technical capabilities, but a lot of times you have to have someone on the ground to penetrate these organizations so you can know their intentions rather than their actions. But look, this is a terrible, unspeakable act. I believe the American people will rally behind and support the President of the United States, and I believe that we will find out who did this, and I think we will respond. And I don't know how you could describe it, very frankly, any other way but an act of war.
You grew up in the conventional military, and we have such an investment in all of that, but for some time, national security officials across all administrations have been saying the great threat to this country is terrorism. Have we devoted enough attention to this kind of an act?
It's very difficult for me to second guess. I think there's going to be plenty of that kind of activity. I would repeat that when I talk to people in the field and when I travel around the world, our lack of human intelligence capability, part of that is the difficulty in penetrating some of these organizations. As you know, they're very difficult, but that may be an area that would have to be addressed. Our technical capabilities, our satellites and others are absolutely superb and sometimes phenomenal. But you've got to divine people's motives. As I said, you've got to get these things before the act is being carried out, and that's probably an area that we have to look at. But I'm sure that this administration and the Congress will devote all their efforts to making sure not only that the people who perpetrated it are punished, but also that it never happens again.
Senator, is it too early to speculate on whether or not we're going to need protective air cover over the nation's capital in some of our more critical areas?
I don't know. I do know that average citizens are going to find it a much more complicated process going to an airport and getting onto an airplane. That'll be one of the first, obviously, one of the first and necessary evaluations that are needed, because I think it's pretty clear now that these planes were hijacked, and how they were able to do that in the case of at least 4 airplanes is going to be a subject of great interest and perhaps some controversy, because there's been this issue of security at airports for a long period of time. How much inconvenience versus how much security, which has been one debate that's been in Congress and in other areas of government as well. So I think that rather than attacking it from having air cover over the Capitol, perhaps we ought to devote our efforts to going places where these acts of terror originate. That would probably be much more effective and cost-effective as well.
Senator, we're still dealing, as I say, with the initial stages of shock, but in fact, it is hard to overstate the magnitude of all of this or the continuing effect that it will have on the business of this nation.
Oh, I don't. There's never been anything like this in our lifetime. Pearl Harbor was a horrible and dastardly deed, and I don't like to compare it to Pearl Harbor. But this is unprecedented in its scope and frankly, its efficiency.
Senator John McCain, thank you very much for being with us today.
Tom.
Thank you. Under these very difficult circumstances. It's also worth pointing out that in Pearl Harbor, it was a military attack on a military installation. This was an attack by terrorists using innocent American civilians, for the most part, in hijacked airliners directed at targets filled with civilians, with the exception of the Pentagon, obviously. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager now for an update. 4 planes hijacked today, Bob. 2 United, 2 American. Bring us up to date.
With a total toll just in the airplanes, so thousands dead presumably on the ground, but just in the airplanes, 266 dead. She said 2 American planes, 2 United planes. 2 of those planes were taking off from Boston, 1 from Newark, and 1 from Washington Dulles. 2 went into the World Trade Center buildings, 1 went into the Pentagon, and 1 crashed in rural Pennsylvania with no idea where that one was being hijacked to. At last report, and this report was about 40 minutes ago, there were now only 50 planes left in the air, 50 commercial flights over domestic U.S. airspace. So that is saying no new flights were being allowed to take off, haven't since 9:30 Eastern Time this morning. The planes that were already in the air were allowed to continue on. There were only 50 of those still in the air. They were mostly about 20 minutes away from airports, so presumably almost all of those should have landed by now. There were also 22 international flights still in the air, heading here. Initially, the word was they were going to be diverted to Canada, and then the decision was made that that would be just too hard for Canadians to handle, and so those 22 flights were going to be allowed to land in the U.S. So far, we don't know of any of them landing. But this is a very important point. The FAA knew of no problems with any of those 50 planes still in the air in the U.S. or 22 in international airspace bound here. So that would seem to indicate that the problems are over in terms of these hijackings. Just to run the flights down very quickly, the first was an American airliner, Boston to Los Angeles. There were 92 killed on board that one. It went into the World Trade Center. That was the first event. Then there was a United plane leaving from Boston. 65 were killed on it. It also went into the World Trade Center. It, too, as the American plane before it, was supposed to have been bound Boston to Los Angeles. Then there was an American airliner leaving from Dulles Airport bound for Los Angeles, 64 aboard, and it crashed into the Pentagon. And finally, a United flight leaving Newark Airport bound for San Francisco. It went into rural Pennsylvania, so we don't know what its intended target was. Now, in terms of what Senator McCain was talking about, when you think of a plane being hijacked, you've got to get the hijackers aboard, and you have to get some sort of deathly weapon aboard, like a gun or some explosives. And there are 2 ways to do that. Either they go through passenger screening and manage to sneak through passenger screening without getting caught, or you get behind the doors somehow and sneak those people aboard behind passenger screening as though they were an airport employee. There have been investigations done on both those things. The FAA tests them a lot with plainclothes people to see if they get through, and every time they do it, a sizable percentage do get through passenger screening with mock weapons or mock explosives. And the same thing on the employees behind the lines. A sizable number do manage to get through the doors. So we'll be seeing in coming days what it was that led to all this. Tom?
Bob, any indication from the FAA of radio traffic indicating that there was a hijacking underway? No,
what it is in the cockpit, presuming that an armed person, in the course of a hijacking, an armed person or somebody with explosives has broken into the cockpit, and the pilot, therefore, cannot say it over the open radio because the hijacker would take action against the pilot. So there's a button that you push, and the button sends out a code, and it tells the appropriate air traffic controllers, and word is flashed to Washington immediately that there's a hijacking in progress. So one could presume that that happened in all 4 of these flights. Of course, we don't know at the moment, but it certainly must have. Then you wonder, too, because the targets were hit so precisely, is that somebody standing behind a pilot and saying, okay, now fly this right into a World Trade Center tower? Or is it an experienced pilot, the hijacker himself, who gets the pilot out of his seat and takes over at the controls to guide it in at the last minute? We don't know, of course. Yeah.
All right, thanks very much. NBC's Robert Hager, who will be monitoring the airline part of all of this. The 4 hijacked airliners, in effect, became guided missiles in the hands of terrorists who hijacked the plane. They took innocent people to death with them, 266 altogether. President Bush is at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana at this time. We're told other senior members of the Bush administration are in secure positions. There's code red at the Capitol right now. House Speaker Dennis Hastert was removed to a secure position. All financial markets have been closed down. All national monuments have been evacuated. Across America, in places like Minneapolis, Kentucky, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, a number of critical installations have been closed down as well. This country, the most powerful in the world, has been, in effect, semi-immobilized today by these terrorist attacks. And we can only hope that they are now all over with. When we heard this morning at 8:42 that the World Trade Center had been attacked, we thought that that was a single, a solitary and horrifying event. Not too long after that, the second one was hit. And then NBC's Jim Miklashevsky here on NBC said an explosion was felt at the Pentagon. And that was a plane that went into the Pentagon, another airliner near the Hillip pad there. It fortunately was on the far side of the building from the most critical offices housing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Intelligence Center, and of course Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, who at first did not want to evacuate the building, and then he was persuaded that that was in the best national interest of this country to do just that. And then of course we had the situation in Pennsylvania where a United airliner crashed into the ground. It too had been hijacked. James Lee Witt is the former head of the Federal Emergency Administration in the Clinton administration. He was well known during his tenure there because there were so many natural disasters around the country. Mr. Witt, what is FEMA doing at this hour?
Well, Tom, I'm sure that they've already activated the Operations Center and also talking to the City of New York Emergency Management and Governor Pataki's office in putting together whatever resources they can to support their efforts in meeting that immediate need. And I'm sure they're probably activating some search and rescue teams. Probably. Go ahead.
I know, James, from our own experiences together that you had lots of contingency plans for tornadoes and for hurricanes, those kinds of natural disasters. What did you have in planning at FEMA for a terrorist attack?
Well, of course, you know, after the Oklahoma City bombing, Tom, we've worked very hard in putting together a very strong federal response plan in which they have continued to work on, particularly adding the terrorist component to that, and working with the FBI, who will have the lead on this in crisis management. And, of course, FEMA has a consequence management, and I'm sure Director Albaugh and all the staff there are liaisoning with the FBI at this time.
Was that something that you prepared on your own, or did you do that in close coordination and get regular updates from the FBI?
We worked very closely with the FBI, and if there was a threat, then they would notify us and work very closely with them, and as far as having someone in their operations center.
When you look at those pictures of what happened in lower Manhattan, in the canyons of this great city with those two 110-story buildings coming down, you can only imagine what the carnage must be on the ground.
It's probably horrifying, and I saw earlier said it looked like a war zone, and I'm sure it does, and just looking at the pictures. But, you know, there's so many firefighters and police officers that were probably up at the base of that building, probably in that building, trying to get people out, and I'm sure that, you know, the loss is going to be tremendous, and the pain is going to be felt for a long, long time.
Jamie Lee Witt, thank you very much. By the way, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban movement on Tuesday said that Osama bin Laden, they are closely allied with him, was not responsible for the attacks on the United States. What happened in the United States, according to the Taliban, was not a job of ordinary people. It could have been the work of governments. Osama bin Laden cannot do this kind of work. Neither can we, a Taliban spokesman said from the southern city of Kandahar. The Taliban, of course, a very militant and very conservative Islamic organization and widely believed to be harboring Osama bin Laden, a very wealthy Saudi dissident who has a very sophisticated apparatus at his disposal. He has not been seen for some time, although he does appear from time to time on some Islamic media outlets. One reporter who has been in touch with him said that 3 weeks ago he said an attack was planned on the United States, but that, of course, has not yet been verified. He is, at the moment, I think fair to say, at the top of everyone's list of suspects. But as we have learned on these occasions in times past, it's often not the best thing to do to make a premature judgment. There is the picture that we have often seen of him as he has declared a holy war against the United States. Let's go to General Norman Schwarzkopf now, who had the Southern Command and, of course, commanded the forces during the Persian Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf, I've been trying to review in my own mind the incidents in which the United States has been a conspicuous participant or absent in the past month or so. We lost a spy plane over southern Iraq. We've stepped up pressure on southern Iraq. Obviously, in the Middle East, in the ongoing dispute between the Palestinians and the Israelis, there's a great feeling that the United States is siding only with the Israelis. The war in Sudan goes on, but we've not taken an active role there. Are there any other signs on your radar screen that would indicate that this kind of thing was likely to happen?
Well, you know, Tom, the truth of the matter is that most of the Middle East countries consider the United States to be, you know, the main source of support for Israel. It isn't isolated just in certain states. And, you know, any one of those people, if you got them aside and asked them truthfully, they would tell you that they were not in favor of our policies with regard to Israel.
So do you think that that probably was the cause of all this continual escalation that has been going on between Palestine and Israel? And there's been an absence of participation, I think that it's fair to say, on the part of this administration and all of that.
Well, I think that's kind of speculation at this time. I certainly think that you know, the reason why the United States is hated in so many places in the Middle East is with regard to the support of the state of Israel. And as a matter of fact, they'll openly state that if Israel had not had the support of the United States, it wouldn't exist today. So they go so far as to say that.
There are people, many people, still trapped.
When you and I were talking earlier, we were commenting on the sophistication of this attack and the complexity of that. Doesn't that stun you some?
It really does. I mean, just what was mentioned by, you know, by Robert Hager, the fact that undoubtedly, you know, I can't see any U.S. commercial airline pilot flying their plane directly into an obstacle like that. Undoubtedly, there was, you know, somebody at the controls that was able to guide the plane there. That in itself is kind of scary. I told you earlier about the fact that it bothers me that with all the devices we have against hijackers, that hijacking can still take place on this scale and organized in that fashion. That causes me concern. I certainly agree with what Senator McCain said about the fact that, you know, many years ago, we abandoned human intelligence. The attitude was that only bad guys have spies, and good guys don't need spies, and we put satellites in the air, and we put a huge amount of investment into technical intelligence. At the same time, we dismantled human intelligence. I don't know what the status of that is today, but we damn sure need to get somebody inside these organizations. I would tell you that...
General, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment because we're looking at some scenes that we have not yet had an opportunity to see. It does look like a nuclear winter in lower Manhattan. It is one of the most vital areas anywhere in the world, obviously. The home of the financial markets, the World Trade Center, lots of residences. There's been a real revival down there in recent years, and it has a great gray pall of dust and smoke and debris. And of course, overlaying all that is the psychological effect of knowing that there could be a casualty list in terms of fatalities that could go into the thousands.
Yeah. I mean, Pearl Harbor, we lost 2,400. And, you know, when you hear the numbers today, it's hard to believe that we're not going to greatly exceed that number.
And as I pointed out earlier, in Pearl Harbor, it was a military attacking a military installation. This was the use of innocent people in commercial airliners to attack other innocent people in New York. There was one military target, obviously the Pentagon. You can see, if you're looking at this with me, General, the extent of the damage in lower Manhattan.
Yeah, unbelievable. Unbelievable. And you know, it's the natural inclination is, okay, we got to hit somebody back. And in this case, what's going to, you know, be even more frustration to the national psyche is you can't hit back. You know, you don't. Who are you going to hit at this stage of the game?
Yeah. Thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. We'll ask you to stand by. We'll be coming back to you. This is as effective as a bomb being dropped there. There were two bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those two buildings, and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion, there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists. Robert Harper was one of those who was in the area when all of this occurred. Mr. Harper?
Yes. Tom, how are you today?
Tell me where you were when the first plane flew into the first building.
I was down below the World Trade Centers. I was arriving at work just a little late, and and we could the first plane had crashed into the building, so there were many people, sort of standing around. There were EMS workers running around as well, and you could see the second plane coming around and everyone sort of pointing up, and then that second plane just crashed into the building.
And what about people who were trying to get out of the building? We had one report of bodies falling through the air and people jumping from windows. Did you see any of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a very traumatic day, I think, having seen that, because where the initial explosion was, there was a lot of black smoke coming out of around, I believe it was around the 78th floor, and you saw people jumping for their lives out of the 78th floor of the World Trade Center. Smoke everywhere, fire everywhere, and people were continuing to jump out of the 78th floor. So people began to run away, because once the second explosion happened, the debris that was caused by that began to fall everywhere, and everybody just started running toward the mayor's office. I began to run toward the Woolworth building, which was close to that, and then as I got closer to that, I realized if the top of the World Trade Center hit the Woolworth building, that building too would be affected, and it might also fall down.
Did you have a sense right away that these buildings could come down?
Not initially. For about 15 minutes or so, people only thought, they couldn't really tell what had happened, and only after the second plane hit did people realize that, this is probably something that was orchestrated. And so then people initially, who had, been trying to go back to the scene and try to help people, realized that another plane had hit the building, and that's when people said, look, this can't have been a mistake.
Where are you now?
I'm outside of the emergency room at Presbyterian Hospital. I've just been released for smoke inhalation. I've been in the hospital there. They rushed me to the hospital, not too long after that, because the black soot and everything that was associated with the building, heavy black smoke engulfed the entire financial district. From 9 o'clock onward, and we were sitting on the side of the road. EMS workers were there administering oxygen to people, thinking that everything was okay. And then as they began to realize that the explosion might have caused so much trauma to both the World Trade Center that they would fall, then everybody just began to run because they saw that the building itself was actually going to fall. So all of the people that had gone to help out were then put in double danger, because you were then running, and the building literally came and fell, over the entire financial district area. It was a complete nightmare. Black smoke everywhere. People were running toward the Brooklyn Bridge, running away from the mayor's office, afraid that the falling part of the World Trade Center would hit other buildings, and that would cause a topple effect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harper, and thank God you're okay, and I hope that you'll be able to deal with all of this. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a real mess, and I can't, coming back in the ambulance, somebody said, one of the things that they remembered, thinking about is the date today is September 11th, so 9/11. So, it's something that can't really go without notice, is that this was completely planned, completely orchestrated. Whoever did this has been planning this, obviously, for a very long time.
Thank you very much, Robert Harper, who was one of the survivors who was just a little bit late to work this morning, but then got caught in the devastating attack on the Twin Trade Towers. It's hard for me to overstate to people who are unfamiliar with New York just how dynamic that area is in terms of people coming and going. The two towers are 110 stories high, or they were. 20 to 50,000 people would work in them at any one time. It's just a few blocks from the stock market and from many of the principal banks in America, to say nothing of residential areas. And we will not know for some time what the death toll is there, to say nothing of the number of people who have been injured, so many of them with burns. Let's go to Washington now, and NBC's Washington Bureau Chief Tim Russert. Tim, give us the state of play in the nation's capital right now. We know that the White House and the State Department and CIA have been evacuated. Dennis Hastert has been removed. Where is Dick Cheney at this hour? Do we know?
Tom, he is in a secure location. They won't tell us exactly, but I do know that he is there with his top-level aides. We have heard from some of those people. He has been in constant communication with the President of the United States and the National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice. Tom, I've been speaking to people in the intelligence and law enforcement community, in and out, those who've served, those who are serving now. No one is the least bit surprised that there was a terrorist attack on the shores of America. Every person, to a man and woman, absolutely stunned, not only by the magnitude, but by the precision of this attack. They are absolutely convinced that there's only a few cells that could possibly have done this. And this is quite interesting because I didn't realize it until it was pointed out to me. Every one of the 4 hijacked planes that Bob Hager talked to you about was bound for California. In the words of this high-ranking official, the bastards knew they all had a plane full of fuel for the maximum impact upon collision. There is, in my experience in Washington, unprecedented anger here, but no one knows how or where to channel it. Right now, the situation is a bit chaotic. Communication is difficult, but the Bush administration is underscoring that the president is in charge, in command, in constant communication, and will bring these people to justice. They just know it's going to take a long, long time.
Tim, it's also going to be a test of the political maturity, if you will, of Washington. It's a city that has been so riven by what many would describe as petty political disputes. But this is one nation on this day.
Suddenly, the Social Security lockbox seems so trivial, Tom. One official said to me, Tim, your life is going to change, but more important, your son's life is going to change forever. America will never be the same after September 11th, 2001. The levels of security, heightened tension, the way we look at each other and look at our institutions will, in fact, be altered. That will bring some gratitude, if you will, to the terrorist. And that's why we as a nation, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, are, as they talk with one another today, are absolutely unified in their attempt to strike back, but also try to put salve on the national psyche so we don't become an armed camp resisting an enemy we really can't identify and never know when is striking.
Because the consequences psychologically for this country are every bit as great as they are physically for America as well. It is worth pointing out, I suppose, that we all breathed a great sigh of relief when the Cold War came to an end with the collapse of communism. And yet there was nothing as devastating as this for this country during that long, cold twilight that we faced down communism in Moscow with its considerable nuclear arsenal, which it still has in place, obviously.
You know, Tom, it's a very important point because all during this past few weeks, the debate about missile defense systems, many people were saying publicly, even those proponents or the detractors, well, you know, we're a long way from research on this, but there is a potential threat of a rogue nation launching a missile or an accidental launch from Russia or China modernizing their force. But everyone kept saying the true risk, the real risk is terrorist attack, and we plain don't know how to defend ourselves. But again, and let me underscore this, people are absolutely stunned, disbelieving that something so well coordinated, something is with a tick-tock like this, 4 hijackings within a matter of an hour, and then being able to take those very planes and drive them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And there is growing suspicion, Tom, here, that the plane that landed, it crashed in Pennsylvania, was most likely headed for the Capitol or White House. That's the operating theory of many of the people I've spoken to today.
Thank you very much, NBC's Tim Russert. The equation has changed for all of us personally and professionally in the course of the last several hours, and we'll be dealing with this for a long, long time. But first, we want to take you through the eyewitness accounts of people who were witness to what happened here on a very sunny early fall morning in New York today. Some of the eyewitnesses.
I spent a year in combat. I never saw anything like this. Saw a lot of people die, but nothing this devastating.
We carried a bunch of people that we found laying in the debris. It was complete darkness. We stumbled over some people. We picked them up and carried them across the street.
You could hear the rumbling. When you looked up, you could see the top of the building just crumbling.
Then there was the haunting story from an eyewitness that we heard from a few moments ago of people in wheelchairs who were unable to get out of the building as he ran down the stairs, and he was obviously overcome with emotion as he described that for us. We don't have any numbers for you. We're trying to be as circumspect as we can be. All public officials are saying that they expect the final death toll to be horrendous. But this business of determining how many people are still in the rubble will take many, many hours, if not days, to determine. Here is a quick summary of what we have been through today in this country on the 11th of September, the year 2001. At 8:42 this morning, first, one plane that had been hijacked crashed into the World Trade Center. Then, not too long after that, a second plane. About an hour later, the Pentagon was attacked by a hijacked airliner, and then came word that another hijacked airliner had crashed outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When we saw the first reports and witnessed, those of us who live in New York, of the World Trade Center being hit by an airplane, at first all of us thought, I'm sure, that it had to be some kind of a terrible accident. And then when we heard that a second plane, and you could see it flown deliberately into the World Trade Center, the horror of this terrorist war began to unfold, and it continues to unfold here now almost 5 hours later. And we'll be continuing to cover this across America and in the nation's capital. NBC's Pat Dawson has been not too far from the World Trade Center throughout most of the day, where it has been chaotic and terrifying. Pat?
Tom, as you point out, we try not to exaggerate very much in this circumstance, and yet in many ways it's hard not to exaggerate just the things we have been seeing and the things that we have been told. I think it is fair to say that the task that now confronts rescue workers here is Herculean, a very, very difficult task, and it is of two parts. It has been about 3 hours since what we might call the last catastrophic incident in a morning of catastrophes. That is since the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which used to stand behind me just about 10 blocks south, right below there. It used to tower above the buildings, which you can see, and obviously it is no longer there, nor is the South Tower. 3.5 hours since that happened. There have been no catastrophic incidents since then, but it has affected the rescue effort clearly because they are afraid of what could happen, what still might happen, since there were a sequence of catastrophes, if you will. That has made the rescue very, very difficult. At this point, we are being told unofficially that there may be as many as 200 to 300 rescue workers who are actually down there. We have seen pictures of some of them. They are down around the base of this building. They are beginning the, again to use that word, Herculean task of trying to find the people who might be alive in that debris. We know that there are a great number of people who are dead in there. Unquestionably, what they are hoping to find is survivors, and at this point they really can't speculate on how many there are, how many there could be, and I don't think it really serves us at this point to speculate on the numbers that it could be. One of the tasks, though, is to try to get this rescue effort in its entirety going, and as you can see behind me down here, there are probably hundreds of New York City and New York State and federal rescue people who are involved, fire, police, emergency service, quite a few. In addition to those, the task is certainly aided by the American Red Cross's disaster relief teams. They are here on the scene. This is Frank Donahue, who is with the American Red Cross. Frank, tell me first of all, as you start out here, what is it you're trying to do?
Well, our immediate purpose is to kind of assess what role the Red Cross can play initially, and certainly it's to help the emergency medical people that are here provide any kind of relief and support we can for them. People being evacuated from neighborhoods need a place to go, and the Red Cross is setting up service centers and shelters. There's one at Grand Central Station and Penn Station. And then the blood supply, making sure we have a safe blood supply, not only here, but throughout the country.
Do you have any idea, have you heard, how many casualties have been dealt with so far?
No, I have not. I'm sorry. I have not heard that.
Is it now, part of your task, though, is also to provide blood supplies. Obviously, that will be needed in huge
Absolutely, and people throughout the country are responding. They should call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. It's important to know that this incident, and you know, there's blood needed here in Altoona, there's blood needed all throughout the country that's been affected by this disaster. Mm-hmm. Another part is people that are moving around, are traveling today. No airport in this country is open, and so Red Cross volunteers are in every airport providing assistance to families. Families are calling the Red Cross here in New York as they are calling their local Red Cross to try to communicate and find the well-being of people that were in this building, as well as people in the other affected areas. So
you were also telling me about grief counseling and dealing with people who've been traumatized around the country, maybe at other airports.
Absolutely. Boston, for example, LAX, where those airplanes were coming from and headed to, we have Red Cross mental health worker volunteers there that are providing assistance to families. And again, that's happening throughout the country where people have been affected by this disaster. Here in New York alone, the Greater New York Red Cross has had lots of experience at the World Trade Center a number of years ago. Today, there's about 1,200 local Red Cross volunteers here in New York providing food and shelter, direction, and support to people that are incredibly affected by this incident.
And how many Red Cross workers do you think around the country?
Oh, a number of thousand, a couple thousand for sure. I know in Philadelphia, where I came from, we're on standby working with emergency management. It's the same thing in every major metropolitan area that Red Cross workers work closely with emergency management.
Frank, thank you so much for taking some time out. We appreciate it. That was Frank Donahue, the American Red Cross. Tom, that brings you pretty much as much information as we have here in what remains a fairly chaotic situation. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pat Dawson. As the shock begins to wear down, we're going to all of us are going to have our patience tested as well as we await these reports. We'll try to deal with it as factually as we possibly can. It does now appear that the wave of attacks is over. We could not be certain of that just a few hours ago, as there were these reports of planes that were still in the air, some that had been hijacked, and their destinations were uncertain at that time. This is a live picture of Lower Manhattan, missing two of its most familiar profiles, obviously. The twin trade towers of the World Trade Center, iconic buildings here in New York, really representing, symbolic, if you will, of the enormous economic strength of this country. They sustained an attack in 1993. They were reopened. The country came back from that, and we went about our merry way again, thinking that in Fortress America this couldn't possibly happen. But of course it has. Neil Livingston is one of the most widely recognized experts on international terrorism. Mr. Livingston, we keep coming back to the same issue. This was a very sophisticated attack. This was not just a lone suicide bomber of some kind. 4 hijacking simultaneously. Obviously someone in the cockpit who knew how to get the plane to the targets that they wanted to get them to. And it had to have happened over a long period of time, and they were all transcontinental flights loaded with fuel.
Tom, this is our worst case nightmare scenario, the one that we've hoped would never happen, and that would be a multiplicity of targets with a multiplicity of highly sophisticated bombs, in this case aircraft, and very symbolic targets. And so this great deal of thought went into this, a great deal of time and money. This kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. So we can anticipate that maybe a year or more was probably devoted to planning this attack, and there may be others coming.
Mr. Livingston, I remember that the FBI has been concerned for some time about the number of cells harboring terrorists in America that have been growing. Is that true?
Well, there clearly are a number of people in the United States that have been the beneficiaries of our relatively liberal immigration policy that have hidden within various communities here and have expressed very strong anti-American sentiments. Whether that can be translated into terrorism at this point is open to question. I would suspect that what we will see in this case are perhaps foreign nationals who have arrived in the United States strictly to carry out this mission, hijack these aircrafts, and take them to their targets. Very similar to what we saw in that millennial potential attack when a man was arrested at the border in Washington State who was going to carry out bombing attacks in the United States. He was an outsider who had been sent here to do that.
All right, Neil Livingston, thank you very much. I also have on the phone now Anthony Lake, Tony Lake, a former National Security Advisor to President Clinton, who's been a longtime student of the prospect of terrorism in this country, recently wrote a riveting fictional account of the various scenarios that the United States may have to deal with. But even in your most wildest imaginative days, Tony, you could not have anticipated something like this.
No, it's terrible. It's hard to say you can be lucky in any respect in something in such a catastrophe. But one of the great dangers still lurking out there is that it could have involved some kind of weapon of mass destruction.
But at the same time, it's hard to understate the amount of damage that has been done here physically and certainly in terms of loss of life. When you have an institution like the Pentagon attack, the World Trade Center's attacked, and the plane that went to Pittsburgh might have been headed for the Capitol or the White House, for God's sake.
Yes. No, this is terrible. As I said, a catastrophe. Clearly a very sophisticated terrorist attack. Our intelligence community has headed off some in the past year or two. Their ability to evade our usual intelligence gathering methods in order to pull this off is extraordinary. And one question now we need to focus on is not only why did this happen, but where do we go from here?
Well, short term, if you were the National Security Advisor now back in your old office in the White House, what would be your recommendations in terms of a suppression of some of our normal liberties that we have in this country?
Well, we mustn't defeat our liberties in trying to defend them. I think what I would be urging now is, first of all, of course, get all the information we can immediately while dealing with the human dimensions of this catastrophe. And then thinking ahead, I think there are three fronts we have to act on. One, there must be, once we have identified the source of this, there must be an American response to this of some kind. Secondly, I hope that this will encourage us to even think in new ways about the nature of our security threats and increase our preparations, for example, for the Coast Guard in defending our ports against possible incidents like this, Customs, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and improving our organization for dealing with catastrophes like that. There's been progress on all these fronts, but not enough. And finally, and I think this is very important, we need to recognize that there is only one group out there that is trying to kill Americans, and that are these terrorists. We are at war with them, and it is not enough for us to attack simply on an American basis. We need to develop a global strategy for a global alliance, for a global war against these terrorists, including, for example, making sure that any nation pays a terrible price when it provides sanctuary for terrorists.
Thank you very much, Anthony Lake, former National Security Advisor to President Clinton, now an author and professor here in the eastern part of the United States. We were just told that the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has stopped all civil flights over Great Britain, whether that was precautionary or in response to a threat that his government received. We cannot say, but all flights there have been canceled. Let's just take you through now a quick summary that does not begin to tell the true story of this day, but it is a kind of a checklist of what we've been through. 4 airliners, 2 American, 2 United, headed for California from Washington and Boston, were hijacked. 2 flown into the World Trade Center here in New York, 1 into the Pentagon, 1 crashed outside of Pittsburgh. The World Trade Center, 2 110-story buildings collapsed completely in lower Manhattan. We're showing you Somerset County, the airport near Pittsburgh, where the other United plane went down. All of this happened in the eastern seaboard, but that's just the geographical connection. This is a wound on America wherever you live, whatever your ideology may happen to be, unless you are in sympathy with the terrorist beliefs. And when those 2 twin trade towers went down, of course, that caused even more damage to lower Manhattan. At the same time, the Pentagon was attacked by one of the hijacked airliners. A number of dead in the Pentagon as well, in the outer rings, first and second rings near the helipad there. President Bush was diverted from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. We're told that Vice President Cheney is in a secure position. We don't know exactly where that is. The third in the line of succession is the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert. He was told there's a code red, and he was taken to a secure position as well. All financial markets have been closed down. Hospitals in New York City are overtaxed. The world's largest, busiest city is at the moment all but shut down, with tunnels in and out of the city that have been closed for security reasons, traffic off the streets. 30 Rockefeller Plaza, where we work, and other midtown high-rise buildings have been evacuated for this day. All the subways are closed down. Across America, national monuments and other high-rises have been evacuated for the day as well as part of the precaution. Still, no claim of responsibility by any one group. The only visible signs of celebration have been on the West Bank. The Palestinian people, who believe that the United States and Israel are one, have been cheering and handing out candy and celebrating, while their leaders have been condemning this attack. NBC's David Bloom is in Midtown Manhattan now with a view over the city skyline. And David, it is still stunning for those of us who live here to look behind you and not see the twin trade towers.
Well, Tom, it is a horrific scene behind me, looking from Midtown Manhattan to lower Manhattan. And if anything, it's gotten more disheartening as the hours have passed. In this sense, the billowing cloud of smoke and debris that you see behind me is in fact growing. More smoke, more debris floating up into the air. The best estimates, Tom, that the New York Police Department is making at this hour in terms of casualties is only to say that they expect them to go into the thousands in terms of dead and injured. We know that the victims are being shipped to individual hospitals, not merely here in Manhattan, but in the entire tri-state area, in Connecticut, in New Jersey as well. One hospital, St. Vincent's in Greenwich Village, reports simply being overwhelmed with casualties. They say that they've put out an all-points bulletin for burn specialists and plastic surgeons. They need all the help they get, and it's no doubt all the hospitals do here in Manhattan. Here is the sequence of events, starting with the first terrorist attack this morning. The first plane attacks the World Trade Center's South Tower at approximately 8:42 Eastern Time. Airline officials say at least 2 American Airlines flights and 2 United Airlines flights were hijacked today, and that the attack planes were the hijacked domestic flights. Roughly 21 minutes later, approximately 9:03 Eastern Time, the second large jetliner can be seen taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's North Tower. Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling and in some cases jumping from the 2 buildings. At approximately 9:40 a.m. in Washington, D.C., a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, one side of the building collapsing. Non-essential personnel from federal buildings, including the White House and the U.S. Capitol, are evacuated. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside. 1/2 hour later, at approximately 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In a separate but apparently related crash, a fourth hijacked plane, a Boeing 767, crashes in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The FAA closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace. At this hour, airline and FAA officials believe the 4 hijacked planes include American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767, bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 90 passengers and crew aboard, crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Washington Dulles to LAX with 64 passengers and crew, believed to have been the plane, crashed into the
Kelly
Pentagon.
Mack and David Cruz of KNBC in Los Angeles. We want to come in with some local coverage here. LAPD Chief Bernard Parks is outside City Hall East right now preparing for a news conference talking about local developments in connection with this attack on America.
I invite all of you and all Angelenos to please join us in a moment of silence for the victims and the families of this morning's tragedies. Thank you. I want to begin this morning by relaying and conveying to the families of the victims of this morning's tragedies that our hearts and our prayers and those of all Angelenos go out to the victims and the families of the people in New York and Washington and other places around the country, in recognition that there are our fellow citizens, our brothers and sisters in this country. We have ordered the flags here in Los Angeles to be posted at half staff. But the question and concerns for many Angelenos may be what is going on in the city of Los Angeles. We have just concluded a meeting of the Emergency Operations Board, and we'll have a report of the outcome of that meeting. But I want to assure everybody that the best news we heard this morning comes from the Los Angeles Police Department, that there have not been any confirmed or credible threats against the city of Los Angeles. However, that is no guarantee. So we have gone forward to take preventive measures and precautionary measures to minimize the risk of an attack here in the city of Los Angeles. We will soon hear reports from our Chief of Police, Bernard Parks, Chief Bomacci from the Fire Department, and others. But to begin with, I want to make an announcement that City Hall, as well as City Hall East and City Hall South, are temporarily closed to the public. The business of the city will continue, but for the time being, we're asking that members of the public not come into City Hall for safety and precautionary measures, and we will revisit the opening of City Hall to the public later on in the day, and we will keep you posted. The business of the city must continue, and all essential services, in particular security and safety activities, will continue without interruption. That includes the police department, that includes the fire department, but it's not limited to that. Our Public Works Commission has informed us that the public works services and the basic services of the city will also continue. The schools inform us that the students remain in schools. The MTA informs us that the buses and the subway keeps moving. So the city of Los Angeles continues to function. We have increased our security measures within the city of Los Angeles Police Department, but we've also been in communications with other agencies at the county level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And we ask all citizens of the city of Los Angeles to please be aware and please be sensitive to our heightened security measures. There's going to be places in the downtown area and other places in Los Angeles where you will see increased police presence. There will be parts of the city of Los Angeles where people may be asked for identification or asked if you live or work in a particular area, and we're asking for everybody's cooperation. We will continue to monitor activities throughout the course of the day, progress in the city of Los Angeles, and activities throughout the country. As I mentioned before, we'll revisit the reopening of City Hall later on in the day and other facilities throughout the city of Los Angeles on a periodic basis, and we will do our best to keep you informed. At this point in time, I'd like to call forward for a brief statement the Chief of Police of the city of Los Angeles, Chief Bernard Parks.
Good morning. Again, I'd like to extend our condolences to the families of many of these tragedies, and we certainly do not know at this point just to the extent of them. But based on that information, the Los Angeles Police Department and the Fire Department has been working hand in hand since 5:30 this morning to assess what is going on in other parts of this country, to take precautionary moves in this city to ensure the safety of the entire public. We have completely reviewed all of our major facilities. We've looked at all of our police station standing plans, security plans. We have put extra officers in the field. We've held over our morning watch. We've done all the things that we think are necessary to assess these issues. We've been in touch with the LA County Sheriff's Department, the local FBI, and all of our law enforcement brothers and sisters to talk about these issues and see what information they may have that would make us better prepared. We want to assure the public that the City of LA is prepared to address this. It's all precautionary, but we cannot be more concerned and cautious after we see the vivid images on the television screen. So we just wanted to make that assurances. We'll be working throughout the day with all the law enforcement partners in this community to ensure that information is passed on readily, that we are aware of all the circumstances and assessment of intelligence information, and so that we can bring about the safest environment in the city of LA. There's one number I'd like to give and encourage you to put this out to the public. It's 888-356-4661. This is a universal number that call in that will give periodic updates on any information dealing with emergency concerns in the city of Los Angeles. We'd like to have that number out as far and wide as we possibly can. Again, it's 888-356-4661. We certainly encourage you to put that out. But we certainly want to, again, reassure the public that all is safe in the city of LA. We certainly have no guarantees, but we're certainly looking at all of the precautionary measures to ensure that the community is as safe as possible. Thank you.
Chief, have you got any intelligence information that would indicate why West Coast flights were targeted?
We're going to answer your questions after Chief Gematria.
We have a couple more speakers and then we'll answer just a few questions. Before I call up the fire chief, I wanted to make a couple more comments. One is, as you all know, our airport, LAX, has been closed to incoming and outgoing flights and will continue to be so, I believe, until further notice. Domestic flights have been rerouted to other locations that will not be disclosed for security reasons, and international flights have been rerouted to Canada. In addition, our harbor has been closed to incoming ships. Again, a safety and precautionary measure, but I want to underscore, we have not received any credible threats, have not confirmed any threats against the city of Los Angeles at this time. And finally, anticipating the question, I have been in touch with Mayor Jim Hahn, who's in Washington, D.C. this morning. He has been fully briefed and apprised of all the activities this morning and is fully aware of what's going on. At this point in time, I'd like to call forward our fire chief, Chief Bamatri.
Good morning. I'd also like to reassure the citizens of Los Angeles that the fire department has taken effective measures to ensure that we have sufficient resources. We've augmented our resources by about 1/3, and in fact, we're experiencing normal incident level at this time. I think it's important for all of us to focus on now the aftermath of what we've seen happen this morning and how we can lend our support both here locally and nationally. We do have an urban search and rescue team that has been activated. It's in the process of deploying. They will be flying to New York to assist in the response there. That team consists of 64 members, and they will be there probably for about a week. There are 27 teams nationally, and I'm sure other teams have been activated also to lend assistance to New York. Locally, we will be providing assistance out at the airport to those passengers and those travelers that have been impacted by the closure of the flights there, and we'll be dealing with those the aftermath of the problems associated with the closure of the airport. So again, all resources are available. We have taken preparedness precautions, and as far as being able to meet the needs, we see that being no problem at this time.
Thank you, Chief. Finally, I'd like to call forward the General Manager of our Emergency Preparedness Department and the Director of the Emergency Operations Center, Mr. Ellis Stanley.
Thank you. Indeed, this is a tragic day for America, and it's important that we do what we can as citizens. And the American Red Cross is one way that all citizens can give by giving blood. Contact your local Red Cross and give blood if you can. It's important also to know that we are in liaison with all of our counterparts, city, county, private sector, federal and state government, and that any consequences that we may have, we are prepared to deal with them. It really is a tragic day for America, and it's important that you and the citizens of this great city understand that we do have a strong preparedness program and that we're working together to make sure that anything that happens, we're prepared to deal with.
Before we open it up to questions, I did want to make a brief statement in Spanish for the benefit of the Spanish language media and residents of the city of Los Angeles. Buenos días y muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos esta mañana. Queríamos hacer un anuncio poco después de una junta que tuvimos esta mañana con los gerentes de todos los departamentos de la ciudad de Los Ángeles. La buena noticia a este momento es que no hemos recibido ninguna amenaza grave contra la ciudad de Los Ángeles. Tenemos la preocupación, según lo que ocurrió esta mañana en la ciudad de Nueva York y en Washington, la ciudad de Los Ángeles siendo la segunda ciudad más grande en este país. Pero la buena noticia es que hasta este momento no hemos recibido una amenaza grave aquí en la ciudad de Los Ángeles. Pero no es una garantía. Tenemos que tomar medidas precaucionarias, medidas de seguridad.
That, of course, is Acting Mayor Alex Padilla speaking in Spanish for the benefit of those viewers who may speak Spanish primarily. He, of course, is filling in for Mayor Jim Hahn, who happens to be in Washington, D.C. on business this morning. He said that there has been no confirmed nor credible threats against the city of Los Angeles or any sites within Los Angeles. That is certainly good news for all of us Angelinos here watching these terrible images of New York City in the background.
As this event unfolded in New York City early this morning at about 10 minutes before 6, and we brought you that, of course, this morning on Today in LA, and then we went to New York, here in Los Angeles, at all levels, beginning first with the city, then very quickly moving, Kelly, to the county level, the emergency preparedness systems all kicked in. These are pre-existing plans that are designed for these very kinds of occasions. We got early reports that Sheriff Lee Baca had activated the Emergency Response Operations Center in City Terrace, and you've been getting, of course, that information. So this briefing now represents the latest update on what all leaders at the various local, county, and state levels have been coordinating for Southern California. We want to reiterate, no threats have been made to the city of Los Angeles.
And we want to tell you, our viewers, that we will be updating you on local developments at quarter after the hour and quarter before the hour throughout the day and evening to let you know if what, if any, pertinent local developments, such as building closures, such as any, God forbid, any threats to the city would be happening. Let's go back to Chief Bernard Parks.
And so the issue is that all that information early on was speculation, and that we've clarified it at this point.
Any ideas to why all West Coast flights?
We've heard from FAA, to state a little bit differently, we have heard from FAA directly that all planes have been accounted for. So the rumor that was there about missing planes headed in the direction of Los Angeles has now been resolved.
What about West Coast flights? They seem to have been targeted by the hijackers. Any ideas to why?
You know, we're only 6 to 7 hours into this incident. We have no ability at this time to assess that. As intelligence information comes in and the people that are closest to it, 3,000 miles away, we will rely on their judgments and information as they investigate this issue. They have a tremendous amount of recovery to go through as they deal with also a significant crime scene. And so we cannot speculate at this time without any substantive information.
What about sweeps of the airport? Are those underway at this time?
Issues. The airport is certainly looking at all of their security issues, and they are looking at a variety of activities there, and whether we call them sweeps, they're certainly paying attention and certainly looking at all aspects of airport security.
Are other airports inside the LAX and Ontario being affected by this?
I think FAA has closed down all flights in the United States, so it certainly affects every airport.
The British Prime Minister very eloquently put into words what many world leaders are telling both their cabinets and their armed forces. The Germans called this act in America mass murder. The French said it needs to be eradicated. Tom?
NBC's Keith Miller, who is in our London bureau tonight with a roundup of European reaction and specifically the reaction of British Prime Minister Tony Blair. On the phone with me now is Warren Rudman, former senator from New Hampshire, national security affairs expert and co-chairman of the U.S. Commission on National Security. Senator Rudman, we've been hearing from one official after another that they were not surprised that there was a terrorist attack, but they were stunned by the complexity and the efficiency and the sophistication of this one. Do you share that?
No, I don't. I certainly was not surprised, and I'm not the least bit surprised at the extraordinary efficiency in which these horrible people carried out this attack against defenseless American citizens. But, you know, from what I have looked at over the last few years, we're dealing with some very sophisticated people who are very well financed and, given the time, can carry out attacks of this kind, as well as the thing that we all worry about, and that is attacks with weapons of mass destruction, as opposed to today's attack, which was a weapon of mass disruption.
But this had so many moving parts to it. Where was our intelligence community?
Well, of course, Tom, the first thing people want to ask is that question. It's a legitimate question, and we've looked at it, and we looked at it in our commission, which, of course, defined this issue as the #1 security issue facing America. Unfortunately, these are very difficult targets to penetrate. Some of these organizations, we don't even know that they exist. You can't get operatives into their midst. Very hard to find out who they are, where they are. My suspicion is that the people who carried out these attacks are people who have been probably filtered into this country over a period of months or years and have planned the attack and found a way to penetrate airport security. Once they did that and they had people able to operate the aircraft, obviously what followed is no surprise.
Senator, how is this country going to have to change in the immediate aftermath of this declaration of war? And it's nothing short of that.
Well, it is a declaration of war. I compared it this morning in many ways to the country's attitude about defense in the 1930s or 1940, and then Pearl Harbor happened, and this country galvanized itself into action. This is another Pearl Harbor. This is a horrible attack on defenseless American citizens. I'm sorry to say I don't think it's the last. We have to do a lot with our intelligence, but more importantly, I think we have to do something about reorganizing our defense of this homeland into a rational organization that can deal with the aftermath, which, as you in New York can see, is just too horrible and too complex to contemplate. We've got to do that, and I must say that both the Congress and the administration have reacted to our report, which was issued in March. People are starting to look at ways to do this. It will take some time, but I hope not too much time.
There was going to be a very big debate in Washington, as you know, about the missile defense shield and about the reorganization of the United States military. Do you think the emphasis will now shift?
Well, Tom, I can only speak for the 12 or 13 members of this commission, and I will read to you just one short sentence. And we said, quote, "This commission believes that the security of the American homeland from the threats of the new century should be the primary national security mission of the U.S. government. With all due respect to the things you speak of, it is our collective belief that this nation has to organize itself both to try to prevent these things from happening and, as important, to find ways to deal with them when they do happen, as they will inevitably with the kind of determined foe that we are facing."
Thank you very much, former New Hampshire Senator Warren Rudman. We are looking at stunning pictures once again of people in lower Manhattan as they began to flee the canyons of Manhattan when the World Trade Center, first one building, one tower, and then the other began to come down. There is a real funnel effect in those narrow corridors in lower Manhattan, and the winds did take on a kind of tornado-like force. Ron Insana and others who work for NBC who were in the midst of all that described it as pitch dark and terrifying for a full 2 minutes at least. Many of them had to seek sanctuary either by breaking through windows, as Ashley Banfield did, into an apartment building, or getting into a car. CNBC's Ron Insana remains with us now. Ron, you've now been able to see those other videotapes that we've been showing of what it's like down there, and I think you used the phrase earlier, nuclear winter, and that's so apt.
And Tom, in some ways, I mean, if you can envision again that scene in Independence Day, that terrifying alien movie that showed New York City exploding in a horrific fireball without the fire, that is exactly what the corridors in lower Manhattan looked like. That's those huge plumes of smoke ripping through the streets and really overwhelming the entire community. It stretched for many, many blocks, the after effects of the implosion of that building, and to be standing in the middle of it, it was indeed pitch black, and had there not been an open car in which to hide, I'm not quite sure in what capacity I would be right now. But for quite a considerable time after the building came down, the air in lower Manhattan was thick, deep gray, unbreathable in many ways. Many people trying to take refuge in buildings that were open to the extent that there were some, or in automobiles, or any place where they could get breathable air.
All right, CNBC's Ron Insana, who was one of the survivors today when he went through to cover the story and then the building began to come down. No one could have anticipated that it would happen as swiftly or as catastrophically as it did. It does lead one to wonder whether there was a secondary explosion of some kind within the building, although it did take, in both instances, a terrible, terrible hit at the top. These buildings are secure. The World Trade Center was bombed in 1993. It managed to survive that. But nonetheless, the full effect of these two airliners, both considerable in size with a lot of fuel on board, brought down two of the iconic buildings in Manhattan. Let's go to NBC's Andrea Mitchell now, who has been keeping track of national security matters and the State Department. Secretary of State Colin Powell is en route back from Peru, we're told. Andrea, do we think he'll come to Washington?
That's correct, Tom. We're not sure that he will come to Washington. He's en route back from Lima, Peru. He was to have gone to Bogota, Colombia today, never got that far. He was at an OAS, an Organization of American States meeting in Lima, Peru, and gave a statement about this terrible attack on our nation, an attack which he described as a military attack, and then left. We're not sure where he is going to be going. As you know, the Vice President is at a secure location, Mrs. Bush at a secure location. Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, was conducting National Security Council meetings in the Situation Room at the White House, even though the White House was evacuated. The State Department Operations Center relocated across the river to another location in Virginia. And George Tenet, the CIA director, was still holding meetings, but in a secure, separate location in Langley, while the rest of the CIA did evacuate. The CIA director on February 7th testified to the Senate Intelligence Committee that there was one person who was capable of coordinated, sophisticated, multiple attacks on the United States with no warning, and that was Osama bin Laden. Now, obviously, there are other collateral groups such as Al-Qaeda in Egypt, based in Egypt, that are closely associated with him, and it's very easy to, as Warren Rudman has warned us against, to speak without knowing fully who is really responsible. But clearly he is top on their list of possible suspects because of motive, because of means, because of opportunity, because of finances. And as Senator Rudman pointed out to you, this is the kind of attack, Tom, that had to be organized for many, many months. Just as we discovered during the testimony by bin Laden associates who were turned by the FBI and testified in the World Trade Center bombing trial, and also in the trial, of course, of the embassy bombings. These people work for months in advance. This is not a response, let's say, to recent events in the Middle East. This is something that was in the planning for many, many, many months.
Yeah, this is a terrible wake-up call for America. So many times we're lulled into the impression that far-off events don't have an effect on us in this country, or when there is a shooting at the CIA, as there was a few years ago, or when we had the bombing of the World Trade Center. Those trials went on, didn't generate a lot of attention. But, Andrea, let's talk for just a moment, if we can, about foreign policy in the United States, about what was on the agenda before this day. The President was going to China in October. The UN meeting will be coming up in the fall. How will all this be affected?
Well, all of these events will be affected in extraordinary ways. We had already seen that economic and global meetings could no longer be held without not only the threat of protests, but without massive protests interrupting the schedule of international gatherings. The UN meetings in New York in September were already going to be very, very difficult to conduct, always have been, as you know. But now it is difficult to imagine how the President can travel safely, how other officials can gather for these international meetings without such an extraordinary degree of protection that the meetings cannot be held as originally envisioned and cannot be held really very effectively. We've seen not only the comments from Europe, but we've seen comments from the top leaders in China and elsewhere, all government leaders horrified by what has happened here in the United States. But this really will change us in profound ways. You and Tim Russert were talking about the psychological effects. We thought after the embassy bomb attacks, when airport security was stepped up so importantly, that we were in a new world, but now we've seen, much to the shock of most Americans, that we are vulnerable to hijackings. We thought that hijackings were events of the 80s domestically here in the United States, not of the late 90s and turn of the century. So this is really a new world as far as our own sense of vulnerability, especially as we travel.
Thank you very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell. We're told now by the FAA that the ground stop, that is, all flights in this country, commercial flights and other private aircraft, have been grounded until at least noon tomorrow. Let's go to NBC's Robert Hager, who's been monitoring the situation for us at the FAA. Bob?
Right, Tom. It's all domestic flights, all commercial domestic flights.
Okay.
The prohibition on takeoffs and landings.
We are about to begin listening in on a press conference being held by Los Angeles County Sheriff Lee Baca. Let's go to him right now.
First of all, Chief Mike Brown from the California Highway Patrol, Chief Brown. Also from the Los Angeles County Fire Department, Chief P. Michael Freeman. Chief Freeman. We have representing Los Angeles Police Department, Commander Betty Kalapetz. Representing the Federal Bureau of Investigation is Mr. Richard Garcia, Special Agent in charge of the Criminal Division. We have Mr. David Jansen, the Chief Administrative Officer from the County of Los Angeles. Chief Bayan Lewis, who is also the Chief of the County Police Services. Supervisor Yvonne Brathwaite Burke, and Supervisor Don Kanabi. It is appropriate for me to open this conference by expressing my condolences and the condolences of all the people of Los Angeles County to the people of New York. As this tragedy unfolds, there's no question that many things are not answered, and therefore preparedness is something we must all engage in. The sheriff has special responsibilities. as the Region 1 Coordinator for Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Response, I have the obligation to coordinate my effort with the governor of this state, and I've been doing so as of now. I've been in communication with all the region coordinators throughout the state, which are likewise sheriffs as myself. I will speak with the governor at 12 p.m. and we will further discuss what California must do to protect its citizens. Meanwhile, the County of Los Angeles is now in a state of emergency alert. The alertness that we believe is important for all law enforcement and public safety are as follows. First of all, we have an emergency preparedness plan. And this plan is something we've engaged in years of experience, where we have experienced disasters of various types within our county. Our Department Operations Center and the County Emergency Operations Center is now activated, and it will remain activated until we get some clarity as to the solution of the problems that are occurring in New York. I've directed all county law enforcement agencies to be in a coordinated alert status with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And this includes the Orange County Sheriff's Department and all law enforcement agencies within the County of Orange. We have prepared and put in place a terrorism early warning group. It is now activated. We have a county-wide tactical alert that is now issued. We have a critical resource staging of the Special Enforcement Bureau of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. We have an air rescue system that is now on alert and is also staged. We have a field force of 212 personnel that are deputy sheriffs that are able to respond immediately to any possible problem of this kind. We have over 1,000 other deputy sheriffs who are now on alert. There is a tactical response force of an additional 120 personnel. We have over 1,600 volunteers who are involved with disaster communications that are now being alerted. There are 5 search and rescue teams that are also a part of the Sheriff's Rescue Program. And we have our arson explosive bomb squad details on 12 and 12 schedules, and they are staged in appropriate parts of the county so they can respond at any moment. And finally, our Aero Bureau is now on full alert and coordinating whatever effort it has to with FAA and other law enforcement agencies. We are at this point in a continual meeting process, looking at all of the evolving events at the New York area so that we can have as much information as possible as to what the circumstances were that led to those terrorist attacks there. At this point, I will ask Chief Mike Brown of the California Highway Patrol to give a few comments as to what the state's effort is in this regard.
Thank you, Sheriff. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Since early this morning, the Highway Patrol has been on tactical alert, as have the other agencies in Los Angeles County. We have brought in additional officers to assist us with some transportation-related issues we anticipated. In fact, those have occurred, largely with some of the evacuations that have occurred in certain parts of Los Angeles County with public buildings. We do ask that the public try to refrain from unnecessary travel, at least for the short term, until we can get past this and find out more information. And we are also working with our local counterparts and the federal authorities in sharing our assets and information, as well as making certain that we can have a coordinated effort from the state and local level here in Los Angeles County, working through the sheriff here, so that we can respond to the public's concerns. Again, we're working very closely, operating our emergency operations plans, and we have been operational since early this morning after the event transpired in New York City. Thank you.
I would like to now introduce Chief P. Michael Freeman of the County Fire Department.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First of all, on behalf of all the men and women in the fire service here in California, we also extend our condolences to all the victims of this apparent reported act of terrorism. Immediately this morning, upon being informed of what had occurred, We did take care of our local needs and increased our on-duty staffing. We have made special arrangements to be sure that we are fully prepared and staffed to deal with any eventuality here, whether it be fire-related or whether it be related to any sort of medical emergency. We also immediately performed our role as the Regional Mutual Aid Coordinator for Fire Services, and we have assessed the readiness for this entire 5-county area for which we are responsible. We have also been in contact with the state of California, the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, to be sure that the statewide mutual aid resources are in line for fire response if needed. Consistent with this level of alert here within Los Angeles County, we have established personal liaison with the various law enforcement agencies and fire agencies that are involved in this local alert to be sure that we are ready to respond in the event that's necessary. Again, our concern is that we have a level of readiness, but also a state of calm as we, in condolence with the entire country, work through these very difficult times.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Richard Garcia, the Special Agent in charge of the Criminal Division of the FBI.
Thank you, Sheriff Baca. Today, brave men and women, citizens of this country, as well as others, victims, died in what appears to be a tragic, cowardly act of terrorism. Investigations by the FBI has been set at a heightened alert, not only here in Los Angeles, but also throughout the world. The FBI has been coordinating with not only our office in Washington, D.C., but have presence with the FAA, the military, and other state and local offices. We are collecting all the information we can possibly regarding this investigation in a global sense. We are going through the information to determine the potential perpetrators of these crimes, and we will also try to resolve it as quickly as possible. The FBI will be always working in a very coordinated effort with law enforcement and other government agencies, as well as other countries in this world, to try to come to a conclusion to this case. Our hearts go out to all those who have died and are injured as a result of this. The FBI in Los Angeles is working with the other offices in the FBI throughout this country, and we should be able to hopefully in some near future provide some resolution to this. Thank you.
And finally, I will introduce to you Supervisor Yvonne Brathwaite-Burke, who will also be followed by Supervisor Don Knabe.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. I would like to certainly give our sympathy and our concern to everyone who has been victimized by this terrorism. The people in the Pentagon, the people in New York. And I'd like to particularly say to those citizens of Los Angeles who have lost friends and relatives as a result of these plane crashes, who were on those planes on their way to Los Angeles. We want to say to them that you have our heartfelt sympathy and our prayers. We are taking every effort and making every effort to make sure that everyone in Los Angeles County is safe. We're not taking anything, just not taking it seriously. If any threats come up, we're looking at them because we want to make sure that all facilities are safe. I also want to say to the citizens of Los Angeles, let's not take retribution against other innocent citizens within our communities because of their ethnicity or because we feel as though they look differently than from us. I would say to them, we want to look at this as an issue that is of worldwide significance, but we do not want to try to take it out on any of the people of our community. We want to say our health facilities will be operating, and in the event we have a need for them, we are making every effort to assure that they will be ready, as will all facilities. If there are emergencies in Los Angeles, we are preparing, and we've been meeting all of this time this morning to make sure that everything works, but we are also not taking anything for granted. Every possible target of terrorism will be guarded, and so that we will not have to face unnecessary problems in Los Angeles County. I want to say to the sheriff, we appreciate the leadership he has given here, and I want to also say to all of these representatives of whether it's fire, highway patrol, law enforcement, this is a time for us all to work together to protect the citizens of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. I think the thing that we want to communicate to all the citizens of Los Angeles County is that we're up and operating. We have a very distinct advantage that those innocent victims today in New York and Washington did not have, and that's a stage of preparedness. And with the coordinated effort of the Sheriff's Department and all the other law enforcement and public safety agencies here in the county, we are in stage 1 alert and ready and able. And I think that that's the big issue. Vital county services are up and operating, and I think we want to communicate that in a message that Yvonne mentioned as well, and that's the fact that, you know, there's been a lot of accusations early on who may have been responsible, who may not. The one thing that we won't want to do is to become terrorists ourselves and to create innocent American victims just like they did on us today. And so I know Yvonne and I are both glad to be here. We were supposed to have been in an airplane to Washington, D.C. at 8:30 this morning, so we didn't quite make that airplane, but fortunately. And so to everyone, particularly to the victims and their families in New York and Washington, our heartfelt thanks, and to all our public safety personnel, keep up the good work.
As a point of information, Supervisor Antonovich and Supervisor
Burke and others, Lee Baca, Sheriff of L.A. County, talking about their commitment to preparedness here in Los Angeles County, and of course relaying the information that there have been no credible threats against any sites here in Los Angeles County. We want to tell you that we are going to have continuous local updates every 30 minutes, quarter after the hour, quarter before the hour, to let all of you viewers here in Los Angeles know of any important developments that may affect us.
And of course, if there are any breaking events that happen here in Southern California or Los Angeles, our teams are out throughout the area of Southern California. But right now, we're going to return to network coverage of the attack on America in New York City and Washington, D.C.
Explosion. Don Rumsfeld wouldn't get out at first, but I gather he too has been taken to a secure location.
Actually, Tom, what Don Rumsfeld did, according to Pentagon officials, is he was in his office on the opposite side of the building from where you see where the plane impacted, and he ran to the area where the fire and the fireball was still engulfing much of the Pentagon. And according to Pentagon officials, he actually assisted in helping some of the injured leave the building before he then returned to his office and then went straight to the National Military Command Center, again on the opposite side of the Pentagon, to monitor events where he now remains. Tom, this airplane that ran into the Pentagon, it happened within the hour from the two planes that ran into the World Trade Center, but it took a full 4 hours before firefighters and rescue workers could actually contain the flames and fire inside, so it was safe enough for them to enter the building. And that was about an hour ago when we were told that rescue workers did enter parts of the building where you can see where the plane sliced through the Pentagon. Now, it was actually fortuitous that the plane hit in this area, if that can be described as fortunate at all. As you see, Tom, the plane sliced through the building. It came in at an angle, flipped over on its right side, and hit actually at about the first and second floors. The third, fourth, and fifth floors were still intact immediately after the blast, but then later collapsed upon themselves. But to the right of that devastated area, you see there's not much fire damage. That's because that part of the building had recently been renovated with reinforced blast walls to prevent a kind of bomb attack, not an airplane attack, of course, but to prevent a bomb attack, and reinforced firewalls on the inside after the bombing at Oklahoma City. When the remodeling of the Pentagon was begun, it was decided to do it with extra reinforcement after Oklahoma City. Now, this area to the left, where you see most of the fire damage, that area was due to be remodeled shortly. And fortunately, a large number of those offices had already been evacuated. Now, there are confirmed dead, many injured. We don't know the exact number yet. And as rescue workers dig through that rubble, certainly the death toll here is going to climb. But really, it could have probably been much worse had this area on the right not been reinforced and the area on the left not been abandoned, really, to permit the redevelopment or reconstruction work that was to go underway. Now, according to eyewitnesses, it was an American Airlines 757 that came sort of from the direction of National Airport, and it just cleared the highway, which is adjacent, the highway ramps, which is adjacent to the Pentagon. But then it came in, and as it approached the Pentagon, almost at ground level, did a very hard right turn and actually flipped on its side and then sliced into the Pentagon on the first and second floors we see there. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC Jim Miklaszewski. In both that flight and the first flight, the American Airlines flight that hit here in New York, had similar patterns. They were flying at very, very low altitude, 1,000 feet according to some New York witnesses. And Bob Kerr said earlier that over Lafayette Park, just outside the White House, they saw a plane go over at a very low altitude that was out of the normal flight pattern for Washington, D.C. So obviously this had been well thought out. That goes without saying. The question is, what happened in the cockpit? Did the terrorists take the controls and drive those planes into the World Trade Center as well as into the Pentagon? And where was that plane that went down in Pennsylvania headed? Why did it go down there? Well, these were all flights that were originally headed for California. We don't have the tapes, obviously. The black box may be able to tell us something. This is the second plane going that you can see entering from right to left there, that hit the second Trade Center tower at the World Trade Center here in New York, causing that enormous fireball. That is the first tower to go down. It was hit a little bit lower. It went down first, and the second one went down as well. So there are so many unanswered questions here. All across America, we know that people are watching with horror and with a great deal of apprehension. There are lessons to be learned from past experiences. Oklahoma City comes immediately to mind. Assistant Fire Chief was John Hanson, who became a very familiar figure and a friend to a lot of us, who's been through all of this. He's now retired from the department in Oklahoma City. John, first of all, this whole business of getting people out of the rubble in New York City and in the Pentagon, but the larger lessons about what we should learn about how we move on from here. What did you learn in Oklahoma City?
You know, Tom, that we can, in fact, do that. We were, you know, stung, we were wounded, but we're not going to be defeated, and we won't in this one. You've heard the President, Mayor Giuliani, the Governor of New York, all make the comments that we're going to stick together and get through this. We've got to be patient. We've got an incredible rescue effort that's going to take possibly months. You know, our rescue effort in Oklahoma City took 17 days. This, with the widespread destruction, will probably go into the months. We've just got to be patient and pull together and just take this head on.
There's so much that we learn from Oklahoma City as well in terms of rescue organization and rescue techniques.
You know, Tom, we had a team from the great state of New York in Oklahoma City. After Oklahoma City, the nation's fire service, FEMA, we all got together, reevaluated what we were doing. The New York City Fire Department is as prepared as any department in the country to handle this. With the support of FEMA and the rest of us around the country, we're going to help those great men and women get through this, just as they helped us back in 1995.
John, tell me, just from a personal point of view, where were you when you heard what had happened today, and what was your first reaction?
Tom, I was at home, and I heard about the devastation during the Today Show, watching Katie and Matt. And it just felt like I'd been gut punched, as the rest of the country. I stopped for a moment, looked at the video that we saw on the Today Show, and just really couldn't believe it at a point. And then reflected on Oklahoma City and knew that we all had to go to work, band together, and help each other get through this. And we will. That's the beauty about America. We'll pull together and we'll get through this and send a message to the cowards who perpetrated this great crime against our nation.
Thanks so much. John Hanson from Oklahoma City, who went through his own trial by fire and shares with us today some of the lessons after the Murrah Federal Building was bombed, and he became such a familiar and reassuring figure to so many of us. We have some information that I can bring you up to date on now. The mayor here in New York said that 1,500 people have been brought to the Liberty State Park area, that is in the lower end of Manhattan, for those of you who come here from time to time, not too far from where ferries go back and forth to Staten Island and over to the Statue of Liberty. 600 have been brought to the New York City area hospitals. 150 of those are in critical condition. New Jersey hospitals have not yet reported in. It's fair to say that that's about 2,100 altogether. Those are the people who have been recovered. We can only guess at how many hundreds more are trapped in the rubble on the ground or in what is left of the buildings. 30 patients, this is in the Washington, D.C. area, 30 people have been brought to Arlington to the hospital at the VA Center in Arlington. 13 have been admitted, 8 are in intensive care, 4 are on ventilators. They have discharged 6 patients so far. There are a variety of injuries, blast injuries and smoke inhalation, which is always a huge problem. Burns, fractures, several patients are critically ill, perhaps 8 altogether. There have been no fatalities brought to that hospital, the VA Center in Arlington, although earlier the Pentagon did say that there were people who were killed in the attack on the Pentagon. St. Mary's Hospital in Hoboken, back to New York again. 450 people have been brought at the Hoboken PATH Station Triage Center. PATH is a train that goes underneath the river over to New Jersey, and so they were treating him right there as a triage center. Mostly minor injuries. Of those injuries are cuts, bruises, burns, broken bones, and so on. So that's a quick update on what is going on at LAX, which is closed down, as are all airports across America. NBC Shelley Smith reports authorities may soon detonate a suspicious device found at the airport. On a day like this, there are any number of suspicious devices and calls that are made by demented people claiming that there's a bomb on board a plane or a bus or in a school somewhere. We're trying to track those down. There have been no other incidents so far as we know across America beside those that we have been witness to here at the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, and of course that plane that went into the ground outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. NBC's Robert Hager. Robert, what's the latest there at the FAA?
Tom, you were mentioning about imagining what could have gone on in the cockpits, and really there are 2 basic scenarios in a hijacking. Either you have the hijacker standing there with a gun at the pilot's head or an explosive device of some kind ordering the pilot to make the maneuvers on the plane, or you have the hijacker actually taking over from the pilot and operating the controls of the plane himself. Now this is all speculative, but just an opinion here. I think to hit a precise target like the World Trade Center there and hit it right on the mark, that in this case you'd have to have the hijacker at the actual controls of the plane, because it's hard for me to imagine.
This is Kelly Mack and David Cruz with KNBC. We want to go to Los Angeles International Airport. Our reporter Patrick Healy is standing by. LAX closed, of course. Patrick, what can you tell us?
Well, Kelly, David, we're at the maintenance building, which is at the very west end of the airport, opposite from where the terminals are. This has become the information center. We're expecting a briefing in just the next minute or so. We're told that we will hear from Jerry Snyder of the Federal Aviation Administration and Michael DiGirolamo, who is involved in operations here at LAX. Now, also this morning, we've been provided with 2 statements from United Airlines and American Airlines, the carriers which, of course, lost the aircraft in the tragedy this morning. And we're beginning right now. Let's listen in.
Along with the entire federal government, would like to express our profound sorrow and sympathy to our grieving nation. The FAA has taken the action to close all of the airports in the United States until further notice.
That would not be picked up by a security
That's
official?
an ongoing investigation.